Lena Carter's hands trembled as she signed away her freedom in exchange for her mother's life. The contract was simple. Marry Victor Romano, the city's most feared mafia boss, become his possession, and her mother would receive the medical care that would save her. No love, no intimacy, just ownership. Victor's cold gray eyes watched her signature dry on the paper, and his first words as her husband weren't vows. They were a warning. You belong to me now, but don't expect me to touch you. I'm sterile. This marriage is business, nothing more. What Lena didn't know was that some truths are lies, and some lies become the most dangerous truths of all. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let's dive into Lena's world. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and dying hope. Lena Carter sat beside her mother's bed, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath like precious coins she couldn't afford to lose. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, marking time in a language of desperation that Lena had learned too well over the past 3 months. Miss Carter? Lena looked up to find a man in an expensive charcoal suit standing in the doorway. He wasn't a doctor. She knew all the doctors by now, had memorized their apologetic expressions and carefully neutral voices when they talked about experimental treatments and out-of-pocket costs that might as well have been moon rocks for all her ability to obtain them. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from too many nights crying in hospital waiting rooms. "My name is Marcus Webb. I represent someone who would like to help you with your mother's medical expenses." He stepped into the room, moving with the kind of careful precision that made Lena think of predators. All of them. The experimental treatment in Switzerland, the specialists, everything. Lena's heart lurched. Why would anyone do that? Because he wants something in return. Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket and set it on the small table beside her mother's bed. "My employer is a businessman. He believes in contracts, clear terms, mutual benefit." What does he want? Lena's fingers itched to grab the envelope, to tear it open and find out what kind of devil's bargain could save the only family she had left. But she forced herself to wait, to hear the price before she sold her soul. Marriage, legal and binding. You would live in his home, bear his name, and comply with certain behavioral expectations. In return, your mother receives the finest medical care available anywhere in the world. The word marriage hung in the air like smoke. Lena laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made her mother stir slightly in her sleep. "You're joking. What kind of man needs to buy a wife?" "The kind of man who doesn't have time for conventional courtship." Marcus's expression didn't change. "The kind of man who needs a wife for appearances, for business purposes, and who prefers a clear contractual arrangement to the messiness of emotional entanglement." "This is insane. I don't even know who he is." "Victor Romano." The name hit Lena like cold water. Everyone in the city knew that name, whispered it like a curse or a prayer depending on whether you owed him money or needed his protection. Victor Romano owned half the city's legitimate businesses and all of its illegitimate ones. He was the shadow that made politicians sweat and rival criminals disappear. He was power and danger wrapped in expensive Italian suits. "You want me to marry a gangster?" Lena's voice came out flat, all the emotion squeezed out by sheer disbelief. "I want nothing. Mr. Romano is extending an offer. You're free to refuse." Marcus gestured to the envelope. "The contract details are inside. You have 24 hours to decide. If you agree, your mother will be on a medical transport to Switzerland within 48 hours. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Miss Carter, Mr. Romano doesn't make this offer lightly. He's researched you thoroughly. He believes you'll honor the contract. That's worth something to a man like him." Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with the envelope and her dying mother, and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She waited until midnight, until the nurses had finished their rounds and the hospital had settled into its nocturnal rhythm of beeping machines and hushed emergencies. Then she opened the envelope. The contract was 20 pages long, dense with legal language that Lena struggled to parse. But certain phrases jumped out at her, stark and unavoidable. The wife agrees to reside in the husband's primary residence for a minimum period of 2 years. The wife will attend social functions as required and present herself as a devoted spouse in all public settings. The wife will not engage in romantic or sexual relationships outside the marriage. The wife will not discuss the terms of this agreement with any third party. And then, buried on page 17, a clause that made her breath catch. The husband acknowledges that due to medical sterility, there is no expectation of children resulting from this union. This marriage is a legal arrangement only and does not constitute a romantic or sexual partnership. Lena read that paragraph 3 times, trying to understand what kind of man would put that in a marriage contract. A man who wanted to make absolutely clear that this was business. A man who expected nothing from her except her presence and her silence. She looked at her mother, at the gray tinge to her skin and the way her collarbones jutted sharp beneath her hospital gown. 3 months ago, her mother had been vibrant, laughing, planning to come to Lena's college graduation. Then the diagnosis, stage 4 cancer, aggressive and merciless. The treatment options were limited and expensive. Lena had dropped out of school, taken on extra shifts at the diner where she worked nights, sold everything they owned of value. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But this could save her. Lena pulled out her phone and dialed the number printed at the bottom of the contract. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Miss Carter." "I'll do it." The words came out steady, stronger than she felt. "I'll marry him." "When?" 3 days. Mr. Romano will send a car for you tomorrow to discuss the arrangements." There was something in Marcus's voice that might have been approval or might have been pity. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Romano." The line went dead. Lena sat in the dim hospital room and felt the future close around her like a fist. The car that arrived for her the next afternoon was a black Mercedes with windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. The driver was a silent man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow who held the door open and said nothing as she climbed into the leather interior. They drove through the city, away from the hospital and her rundown neighborhood, into the gleaming heart of downtown where glass towers reflected the sky and people in $1,000 shoes hurried past carrying briefcases and ambition. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that seemed to scrape the clouds, and Lena was escorted to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that took Lena's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. The furniture was modern and minimal, all clean lines and expensive materials. Everything was white or gray or black, colorless and cold as a surgeon's table. "Miss Carter?" She turned to find Victor Romano standing in the doorway to what looked like a study. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered beneath a perfectly tailored navy suit. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of winter storms. He was handsome in a brutal way, all sharp angles and hard edges, the kind of face that made you think of marble statues and frozen lakes. "Mr. Romano?" Lena's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Victor." He walked toward her with the same predatory grace as Marcus, every movement controlled and deliberate. "We're to be married. You should use my name." "Victor," she repeated, and the name felt strange in her mouth, too intimate for this cold transaction. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His eyes traveled over her, assessing, cataloging. Lena forced herself not to fidget in her cheap jeans and secondhand coat. "You've read the contract." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Do you have questions?" Lena had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. "Why me?" Something flickered in Victor's expression, too quick to identify. "You're resilient. You dropped out of school to care for your mother, worked 3 jobs simultaneously, never complained or asked for help. You're loyal. When your ex-boyfriend stole from you, you didn't go to the police. You handled it yourself." He tilted his head slightly. "I need someone who understands commitment. Someone who won't break under pressure. You've already proven you won't." The fact that he knew about her ex, about the jobs, about everything, should have terrified her. Instead, Lena felt a strange calm settle over her. At least he was honest. At least he wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. "I need you to understand something," Victor continued, his voice dropping lower. This marriage is real in every legal sense. You will be my wife. You will live here, appear at my side when required, and conduct yourself in a manner befitting that position, but it is not a love match. I will not touch you. I will not expect intimacy. That's not what this is. Because you're sterile. The words came out before Lena could stop them. Victor's jaw tightened. Yes, a medical condition, irreversible. I'm telling you this because I want no misunderstandings. Some women might enter this arrangement hoping for something more. I'm making it clear that there is nothing more to hope for. Lena should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt oddly hollow. I understand. Good. Victor pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring. A massive diamond flanked by smaller stones, beautiful and ostentatious and utterly impersonal. You'll wear this. My jeweler will be here tomorrow to size it properly. He took her hand and Lena flinched at the contact. His fingers were warm, his touch surprisingly gentle as he slid the ring onto her finger. It was too large, spinning loosely, but even in the wrong size, it was the most expensive thing she'd ever worn. The wedding will be in 2 days, Victor said, releasing her hand. Small. Just witnesses. Marcus will handle the arrangements. Your mother will be transported to Switzerland immediately after. The treatment will begin within the week. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, but Lena didn't know what else to say. How did you thank someone for buying your life? Don't thank me. This is a transaction. You're giving me something I need. I'm giving you something you need. It's business. Victor's eyes were hard as granite. Marcus will show you to your room. You'll move in tomorrow. Bring whatever you want to keep. Everything else will be provided. He turned and walked back to his study, dismissing her without another word. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded like a cell locking. Marcus appeared at her elbow. This way, Mrs. Romano. I'm not Mrs. Romano yet, Lena said quietly. Close enough. Marcus led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her mother's entire medical treatment. He opened a door to reveal a bedroom that was larger than the apartment Lena had shared with her mother. Everything was pristine. White bedding, gray walls, sleek modern furniture. A glass door led to a private balcony overlooking the city. This is yours, Marcus said. Mr. Romano's room is on the other side of the penthouse. You'll have complete privacy. Of course she would. Privacy was just another word for distance. The closet has been stocked with appropriate clothing in your size. If anything doesn't fit, let me know and we'll have it corrected. Marcus handed her a key card identical to the one the driver had used. This gives you access to the elevator and the penthouse. Don't lose it. What if I want to leave? You can leave anytime you want. The building, the city, the country. Marcus's expression was unreadable. But if you break the contract before the 2-year term is complete, your mother's medical care stops immediately. Choose accordingly. He left her alone in the beautiful, sterile room that would be her cage for the next 2 years. Lena stood at the window and looked out at the city spreading below her like a circuit board of lights. Somewhere down there was the hospital where her mother was fighting for every breath. Somewhere down there was the diner where Lena had served coffee to tired truckers and drunk businessmen, where she'd counted her tips and dreamed of finishing her degree, of a normal life with normal problems. That life was gone now. She'd traded it for this, a penthouse in the sky, a ring worth more than she'd make in a decade, and a husband who'd made it brutally clear he wanted nothing from her except her presence. Lena touched the ring on her finger, feeling its unfamiliar weight. 2 years. She could survive 2 years of anything. She'd survived her father's abandonment, her mother's illness, poverty and loneliness, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that made you wonder if you'd ever feel rested again. She could survive Victor Romano. Tom. The wedding took place in a private room at City Hall with Marcus and Victor's lawyer as witnesses. Lena wore a simple white dress that Marcus had provided. Expensive but understated, the kind of thing that whispered money instead of shouting it. Victor wore the same navy suit he'd worn when they met, and Lena wondered if he owned anything that wasn't gray or black or blue. The ceremony took 7 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, no guests. The officiant was a tired-looking woman who'd clearly performed this ritual 1,000 times and no longer invested it with any particular meaning. She read the words in a monotone, and Lena and Victor repeated them like lines from a script they'd barely rehearsed. Do you, Victor Romano, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Lena Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Lena looked at Victor's face, at the cold control in his eyes, and thought about her mother waking up in a Swiss hospital with the best doctors in the world fighting to save her life. I do. You may kiss the bride. Victor leaned in, and for one terrifying moment, Lena thought he might actually kiss her. But he stopped just short, his lips barely brushing her cheek in a gesture so impersonal it might as well have been a handshake. Congratulations, the officiant said without enthusiasm. You're married. And just like that, Lena Carter ceased to exist. In her place stood Mrs. Lena Romano, wife of the city's most dangerous man, owner of nothing and owned by everything. They signed the marriage certificate in silence. Marcus produced a second set of papers, the contract, now countersigned and notarized. Victor signed first, his signature a bold slash of ink. Then he handed the pen to Lena. She signed her new name for the first time, Lena Romano. The letters looked foreign on the page, like a name belonging to someone else. It's done, Victor said. He turned to Marcus. Confirm that Mrs. Romano's mother has been transferred. I want updates every 6 hours on her condition. Already done, sir. She's en route now. Victor nodded, then looked at Lena. I have a business dinner tonight. You'll accompany me. Marcus will brief you on who will be there and what's expected. Expected? Lena's voice sounded strange to her own ears. You're my wife now. You'll act like it. Victor's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were explaining basic math. In public, you're devoted. You smile, you defer to me, you make our marriage look real. In private, you do whatever you want as long as you stay within the contract terms. Understood? Lena wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the ring in his face and run back to her old life, her real life, where she was poor and desperate, but at least she was herself. But her mother was on a plane to Switzerland flying toward hope, and Lena had signed away her right to run. Understood, she said. Good. Victor checked his watch, a sleek piece of platinum and leather that probably cost more than a car. The dinner is at 8. Wear the black dress in your closet. Marcus will have you ready. He left without looking back, and Lena stood in the sterile government office holding a marriage certificate that felt like a death warrant. The dinner was at an exclusive restaurant Lena had only ever seen from the outside, the kind of place where reservations took months and the waiters wore better suits than most people wore to weddings. Victor's hand rested on the small of her back as they entered, a possessive touch that made Lena's skin crawl and her heart race in equal measure. Remember, he murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her skin, you adore me. Then his expression shifted into something almost warm as they approached a table where 3 men in expensive suits were already seated. Lena watched in fascination as Victor transformed, his cold edges smoothed into charm, his granite eyes softening into something resembling friendliness. Gentlemen, he said, and they all stood to shake his hand with the kind of deference people showed to kings and predators. I'd like you to meet my wife, Lena. Wife. The word still didn't feel real. Lena smiled and shook hands and let Victor guide her into her seat, with a touch that looked tender but felt like a leash. The men, executives from some corporation Lena didn't recognize, congratulated Victor on his marriage with the hearty enthusiasm of people who didn't know it was a business transaction. How did you two meet? One of them asked, and Lena's mind went blank. But Victor answered smoothly, his hand finding hers on the table and threading their fingers together. Lena was working at a diner near my office. I saw her every morning for weeks before I worked up the courage to ask her out. She turned me down the first 3 times. It was a complete fabrication, but Victor delivered it with such easy confidence that even Lena almost believed it. The men laughed, charmed by the story of the powerful Victor Romano being rejected by a waitress. What changed your mind? Another executive asked Lena directly. Lena looked at Victor, at the way he was watching her with an expression that could almost pass for affection if you didn't know it was a mask. He was persistent, she said softly. And eventually I realized that what I thought I wanted wasn't as important as what I needed. It was the truth, in a way. Just not the romantic truth these men were expecting. Victor's fingers tightened around hers, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval or might have been surprise. The dinner dragged on for hours, course after course of food Lena couldn't taste, conversation about mergers and acquisitions and market shares that she couldn't follow. Victor's hand never left hers except to eat, and every time she tried to pull away, his grip tightened just enough to remind her that this was the performance. This was what she'd agreed to. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Lena was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. She kicked off the heels Marcus had provided, beautiful torture devices that had left blisters on her heels, and headed for her room. Lena. She stopped, turned. Victor was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened. He looked almost human like this, almost vulnerable. "You did well tonight," he said. "Thanks." Lena didn't know what else to say. "This will get easier. The performances. Eventually they'll feel natural." Is that supposed to be comforting? Victor's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, it's supposed to be honest." He turned back to the window, dismissing her again. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we're having dinner with my mother. She'll be evaluating you." Lena's stomach dropped. "Your mother?" "She insisted on meeting you. I couldn't refuse without raising questions." Victor's reflection in the window looked tired. "She'll ask invasive questions. Answer them carefully. She doesn't know about the contract, and she can never know. As far as she's concerned, we're a normal couple who fell in love." "Right," Lena said faintly. "Normal." She escaped to her room and closed the door, leaning against it as her heart hammered against her ribs. This was her life now. Performances and lies, and pretending to love a man who'd bought her like property. Lena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a photo of her mother in a hospital bed, looking tired but alert, giving a weak thumbs up to the camera. Below the photo was a message from Marcus. "Treatment begins tomorrow. Doctors are optimistic." Lena pressed her hand to her mouth, feeling tears burn in her eyes. This was why. This was the price and the prize. Her mother was alive, was fighting, was going to survive. Everything else was just survival too. She changed into the silk pajamas that had been provided, too expensive, too delicate, like everything else in this glass tower, and climbed into bed. The sheets were soft as water, and the mattress was probably worth more than every bed Lena had ever slept in combined. She should have felt lucky. She should have felt grateful. Instead, she felt like a prisoner in a very beautiful cage. Through the walls, faint and distant, she could hear Victor moving around in his part of the penthouse. She wondered if he was as lonely as she was, if he lay awake at night thinking about the choices that had led him to this, buying a wife because he couldn't or wouldn't find one the normal way. Then she remembered the coldness in his eyes, the clinical way he'd outlined the terms of their arrangement, and she stopped wondering. Victor Romano wasn't lonely. He was exactly where he wanted to be, in control, isolated, untouchable. And Lena was exactly where she'd agreed to be, owned. She closed her eyes and tried not to count the days until her 2-year sentence was complete. 679 days to go. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm. Victor left early each morning, usually before Lena woke, and returned late. Sometimes he had business dinners she was required to attend, and she would perform her role as devoted wife with increasing skill. Sometimes he entertained associates at the penthouse, and she would smile and serve drinks and pretend she belonged in this world of dangerous men making dangerous deals. In between, she was alone. The penthouse was a beautiful prison. Lena could order anything she wanted, food, books, clothes, and it would appear within hours. She had access to a gym in the building, a pool on the roof, the kind of luxury she'd never imagined, but she couldn't go far. Marcus always knew where she was. Victor's security team, silent men in dark suits who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, tracked her movements. "It's for your protection," Victor had explained when she'd asked about them. "I have enemies. You're a liability now. They'll use you to get to me if they can." Lena hadn't asked what that meant. She didn't want to know. The days blurred together. She video-called her mother every evening, watching her slowly regain strength as the treatment worked its miracles. The doctors were optimistic now. The tumors were shrinking. Her mother might actually survive this. It was enough. It had to be enough. But at night, alone in her enormous bed in her sterile room, Lena felt something in her chest growing heavier. Not quite grief, not quite anger, something closer to resignation. This was her life now. This was what she'd chosen. Then, 6 weeks into the marriage, everything changed. Lena woke up feeling wrong. Not sick exactly, but off. Dizzy when she stood too quickly. Nauseous at the smell of coffee. Exhausted no matter how much she slept. She ignored it for 3 days, telling herself it was stress, was the strangeness of her new life, was anything except what a small voice in the back of her mind kept whispering. On the 4th day, she fainted. She'd been in the kitchen making tea when the world tilted sideways. One moment she was standing at the counter, the next she was on the floor with Marcus crouched beside her, his usually impassive face creased with concern. "Mrs. Romano, can you hear me?" Lena blinked up at him, confused. "What happened? You collapsed. I'm calling a doctor." "No, I'm fine. But when she tried to sit up, the dizziness crashed over her again, and she had to close her eyes against the wave of nausea. "You're not fine." Marcus already had his phone out. "Stay still." The doctor arrived within the hour, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient hands. She examined Lena in her bedroom while Marcus waited outside, and Victor was summoned from whatever business meeting he'd been attending. "When was your last period?" the doctor asked, checking Lena's blood pressure. I don't know. A few months ago? They've never been regular." Lena frowned. "Why?" Dizziness, fatigue, nausea, fainting. These are common symptoms of early pregnancy. The doctor pulled out a small kit. "I'd like to run a test, just to rule it out." Lena's heart stopped. "That's impossible. My husband is... He can't." "Sterility isn't always absolute," the doctor said gently. "Sometimes it means difficulty conceiving, not impossibility. Let's just check." The test took 3 minutes. 3 minutes during which Lena sat frozen on her bed, her mind racing through the impossible mathematics of the situation. She and Victor they'd never even, except the wedding night. Lena had barely let herself remember it. She'd been crying in her room, overwhelmed by everything, and Victor had knocked on her door to check on her. They'd talked. Or rather, Lena had talked while Victor listened, his usual coldness fractured by something she couldn't name. And then somehow his hand had been on her face, wiping away her tears, and she'd leaned into the touch like a person drowning, desperate for any human warmth in this sterile tower. What happened next had been brief, almost dreamlike. A moment of weakness, of loneliness, of two people seeking comfort in the dark. It hadn't been sex, not really. Barely even intimacy. Just closeness. Touch. A few minutes of forgetting the contract and the transaction and everything that made them strangers. Afterward, they'd both retreated to their separate corners, never speaking of it. Lena had convinced herself it didn't mean anything, that it didn't even really count. "Mrs. Romano," the doctor's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "The test is positive." The world went very quiet. "That can't be right," Lena whispered. "Test it again." The doctor ran 2 more tests, both positive. "I'll need to take blood to confirm and check hormone levels," the doctor said, already preparing the syringe. "But based on these results and your symptoms, I'd estimate you're about 6 weeks along. Congratulations." Congratulations. As if this were a blessing instead of a catastrophe. The doctor left to process the blood work, and Lena sat alone in her room, staring at the 3 positive pregnancy tests lined up on her nightstand like accusations. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Victor Romano's child, the child he'd said was impossible. The child that turned their clean, transactional arrangement into something messy and complicated and terrifyingly real. Lena pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling nothing except the sick weight of dread. What would Victor do when he found out? Would he think she'd lied, had trapped him deliberately? Would he void the contract, send her back to her old life with nothing? Would he keep her here forever, bound to him not by paper, but by blood? The door opened without warning, and Victor stood in the threshold, still in his suit from whatever meeting he'd abandoned. His eyes found hers, and Lena watched his expression shift from concern to confusion to something harder. Marcus said you fainted. He stepped into the room, and Lena realized this was the first time he'd entered her space since the wedding night. What did the doctor say? Lena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She couldn't find the words. Victor's gaze tracked from her face to the tests on the nightstand. She watched him process what they were, watched understanding dawn in his eyes like ice cracking. No, he said, and the word was barely a breath. That's not possible. The doctor said sterility isn't always. I know what sterility means. Victor crossed to the nightstand and picked up one of the tests, staring at it as if he could will the lines to disappear. This is impossible. The doctors were very clear I can't father children. Apparently you can. Lena's voice came out sharper than she intended. Unless you think I've been sleeping with someone else, which would be impressive considering your security team follows me everywhere. Victor's hand clenched around the test, and for one terrifying moment, Lena thought he might throw it across the room. But instead, he very carefully set it back down and pressed his palms flat against the nightstand, his shoulders rigid with tension. The wedding night, he said quietly. Yes. It wasn't even. He stopped, drew in a breath that sounded like it hurt. Christ. They stood in silence, the impossible truth settling between them like snow. Finally, Victor turned to face her. His eyes were wild, all the careful control stripped away to reveal something raw and almost frightened underneath. What do you want to do? The question surprised her. What do I want? You have options. Victor's voice was carefully neutral again, the mask sliding back into place. I can arrange for. Don't! Lena stood up, fury suddenly burning through the shock. Don't you dare suggest that. This isn't some problem to be solved or erased. Then what is it? Victor's control cracked again, his voice rising. Because 6 weeks ago, you signed a contract agreeing to a childless marriage. Now you're pregnant with a child I was told I could never have. So forgive me if I'm struggling to understand what the hell this is. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed in her pajamas, in her confusion, in everything. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what this is, or what it means, or what we're supposed to do about it. Victor ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its usual perfect order. He looked lost, and Lena realized she'd never seen him look anything except controlled before. I need to think, he said. He left without finishing the sentence, the door closing behind him with a quiet click. Lena sank back onto the bed and pressed her hand to her stomach again. 6 weeks. A cluster of cells that would become a person, that would bind her to Victor Romano in ways the contract never could. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear, something else was growing. Hope. Fragile and foolish and impossible to deny. Maybe this child was a disaster, but maybe, just maybe, it was also a chance. A reason for all of this to become something more than a transaction. Lena closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to build a real life in this glass tower. A life with warmth and purpose, and something resembling a family. Then she opened her eyes and looked around her sterile room and reminded herself not to hope for things that Victor Romano had made brutally clear he would never give her. But her hand stayed pressed to her stomach, feeling for something that wasn't there yet but soon would be. A heartbeat. A future. A consequence that neither of them could control. The blood work came back the next morning, confirming what the tests had already told them. Lena was pregnant, approximately 6.5 weeks along, with hormone levels that suggested a healthy, viable pregnancy. The doctor delivered the news with professional warmth, oblivious to the tension crackling between her patient and the imposing man standing by the window. Victor hadn't looked at Lena since entering the room. He stood with his back to them both, staring out at the city as if it held answers he desperately needed. His shoulders were rigid beneath his suit jacket, every line of his body screaming control, even as Lena could see the tremor in his hands where they gripped the window frame. I'll need to see you again in 2 weeks, the doctor was saying, handing Lena a folder full of information about prenatal vitamins and dietary restrictions. Given your symptoms, I'd recommend rest and small, frequent meals. The nausea should subside in a few weeks, but if it becomes severe, call me immediately. Thank you, Lena managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. The doctor glanced at Victor's rigid back, then at Lena, and something sympathetic crossed her face. Congratulations to you both, she said quietly, and let herself out. The silence that followed her departure was suffocating. Lena sat on the edge of the examination table in the penthouse's private medical suite, because of course Victor had a private medical suite, and waited for him to say something, anything. Victor, don't. His voice was harsh, raw. Just don't. He left without turning around, and Lena sat alone in the sterile room holding pamphlets about fetal development and feeling the walls of her cage shrink even tighter. The rest of the day passed in a fog of avoidance. Victor didn't emerge from his study. Marcus brought Lena lunch that she couldn't eat, his expression carefully neutral as he set the tray down and asked if she needed anything. I need to know what happens now, Lena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Marcus's mouth tightened. That's not my call to make, Mrs. Romano. But you know him, better than anyone. What will he do? For a long moment, Marcus just looked at her. Then he sighed, and some of the professional distance dropped from his expression. Mr. Romano was told at 17 that he was sterile. A childhood illness, complications from the treatment. He built his entire life around that certainty. Now you've turned that certainty into a lie. Marcus picked up the untouched lunch tray. Give him time to process. He's not going to abandon you or the child. That's not who he is. But he needs to reconcile what he thought was impossible with what's apparently very possible. He hates me, Lena whispered. He hates being wrong. There's a difference. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've worked for Mr. Romano for 15 years. I've never seen him react to anything the way he reacted to those test results. Fear, yes. Shock, absolutely. But also something else. Something that looked almost like hope before he shut it down. Then he was gone, and Lena was alone again with her thoughts and her fears and the impossible reality growing inside her. That night, she lay in bed listening to the sounds of Victor moving around in his part of the penthouse. She heard his study door open and close, heard the clink of glass on glass, drinking, probably, heard footsteps pacing back and forth like a caged animal wearing grooves in the floor. Around 2 a.m, her door opened. Lena sat up, pulling the covers to her chest. Victor stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights. He'd discarded his jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves. His hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and he looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. I've been thinking, he said without preamble. All day, apparently. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face and died. Yes. All day. He stepped into the room, leaving the door open as if he needed the escape route visible. I owe you an apology for how I reacted, for leaving you alone with this. You were shocked. I was shocked too. That's not an excuse. Victor moved to the chair by her window, the one she sat in sometimes to watch the sunrise. He sank into it like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. I've spent 15 years believing I would never have children. Building my life, my business, my plans around that fact. And now you're going to be a father, Lena finished softly. Victor's hands clenched on the armrests. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be that. Nobody knows until they are. Lena drew her knees up to her chest. I'm terrified too, if that helps. It doesn't, but thank you for saying it. Victor's eyes finally met hers, and Lena was startled by the vulnerability she saw there. I've made decisions about how we move forward. Lena's heart clenched. What kind of decisions? The contract is void, not the marriage. That stays legal for appearances and for the child's legitimacy. But the terms. You're not bound to 2 years anymore. You're not bound to anything except shared custody when the time comes. What are you saying? I'm saying you're free to leave if you want. I'll set you up somewhere safe, somewhere comfortable. Your mother will continue receiving treatment regardless. The child will want for nothing, and neither will you. Victor's voice was carefully neutral, like he was negotiating a business deal instead of discussing the dissolution of their lives. Or you can stay. Same arrangement as before, just modified. For the baby. Lena stared at him. You're giving me a choice. You should have always had one. I took it away when I backed you into a corner with your mother's life. This is me giving it back. And what do you want? The question came out smaller than Lena intended. Victor's laugh was bitter. What I want stopped mattering the moment I learned I was going to be a father. This isn't about me anymore. It's about what's best for you and the child. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Victor stood up, already retreating back behind his walls. Think about it. Take as long as you need. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Victor, wait. But he was already gone, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made Lena want to scream. She lay back down and pressed her hand to her stomach, to the tiny cluster of cells that had somehow managed to crack open Victor Romano's carefully controlled world. The question wasn't what she wanted. She barely knew herself anymore, trapped between the desperate girl who'd signed the contract and the woman she was becoming in this glass tower. The question was what kind of life she could build for her child, what kind of parents they could be when they were barely more than strangers bound by biology and circumstance. Lena closed her eyes and tried to imagine the future. All she saw was uncertainty. The days that followed were strange and strained. Victor treated Lena with a careful courtesy that felt worse than his previous distance. He asked about her symptoms, made sure she had everything she needed, checked in with the doctor regularly, but he never touched her, never got too close, maintaining a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between them. Lena found herself missing the cold transaction of their original arrangement. At least then she'd known where she stood. Now everything was murky and undefined, shifting beneath her feet like sand. She was lying on the couch in the living room, trying to read one of the pregnancy books the doctor had left, when Victor came home early from work. It was barely 4 in the afternoon, and he looked tense. "Pack a bag," he said without greeting. "We're leaving for the weekend." Lena set down the book. "Leaving where?" "My house upstate. It's more secure, more private, and you need to get out of this penthouse before you go crazy." "I didn't realize you cared about my mental health." Victor's jaw tightened. "I care about the mother of my child not being miserable. Call it enlightened self-interest." It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Mother of my child. And the words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. They drove north in Victor's car, a sleek black sedan that handled the highway like it was built for speed and escape. Victor drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes on the road. Lena watched the city give way to suburbs to rural landscapes, fields, and forests spreading out beneath a sky that seemed impossibly wide after weeks of seeing the world only through floor-to-ceiling windows. The house, when they reached it, wasn't what Lena expected. She'd imagined another glass and steel monument to wealth and isolation. Instead, it was stone and wood, built into a hillside overlooking a lake that reflected the late afternoon sun like molten gold. It was beautiful in a way the penthouse could never be, warm and solid and real. "This is yours?" Lena asked as Victor killed the engine. "My grandfather built it, left it to me when he died." Victor grabbed their bags from the trunk. "I don't come here often, but I thought you might like it." He was right. Lena loved it immediately. The interior was nothing like the penthouse. Rustic furniture, exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace that dominated the living room. There were photographs on the walls, evidence of life and history that the sterile penthouse completely lacked. "You can have the master bedroom," Victor said, carrying her bag upstairs. "I'll take one of the guest rooms." "Victor, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He set her bag down and turned to face her. "I need you to understand something. This situation, this child, it's not your fault. You didn't trap me or trick me. We were both there that night. We were both lonely and stupid and human. And now we're both responsible for what comes next." Lena felt something crack open in her chest. "I thought you blamed me." "I blame myself for losing control, for letting my guard down, for wanting something I thought I could never have and taking it anyway. Consequences be damned." Victor's voice dropped low. "And then, when those consequences became real, I panicked. I'm sorry for that." "We both panicked," Lena said quietly. "Yes. But I'm supposed to be better than panic. I'm supposed to be in control." Victor's smile was self-deprecating. "Turns out I'm just as human as everyone else. Who knew?" For the first time since the positive test, Lena laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a breath, but Victor's expression softened when he heard it. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll make dinner. And before you ask, yes, I can actually cook." My grandfather insisted. Lena watched him leave, then sank onto the bed and looked around the room. It was comfortable, lived in, with windows overlooking the lake and curtains that moved gently in the breeze from the open window. She could hear birds singing outside, smell pine and water and earth. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Dinner was pasta with fresh vegetables and herbs that Victor said came from the garden his grandfather had planted decades ago, and that still somehow survived despite Victor's absence. They ate on the porch overlooking the lake as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible. "Tell me about your grandfather," Lena said, watching Victor's face soften in a way it never did in the city. "He was a hard man, fair but hard. Built his empire from nothing, taught me everything I know about business and loyalty and survival." Victor set down his fork. "He also taught me that power without purpose is just destruction waiting to happen, that you can be ruthless in business and still have lines you won't cross." "Did he know what you would become?" "He made me what I am, groomed me for it from the time I was old enough to understand, but he also tried to give me this." Victor gestured at the house, the lake, the peaceful twilight. "A place to remember that I'm more than the empire, that there's supposed to be something worth protecting beyond money and territory." "Do you believe that?" Victor was quiet for a long time. "I used to, before he died. After it was easier to just be what everyone expected. The ruthless Victor Romano, the man who doesn't compromise, doesn't soften, doesn't need anything except power. And now? Now I'm going to be a father, and I have no idea how to reconcile those two versions of myself." Victor looked at her, really looked at her, and Lena saw fear in his eyes. "What if I can't? What if all I know how to do is destroy and control?" Lena reached across the table and took his hand. He flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. "Then you learn. The same way I'm going to have to learn how to be a mother when I barely know how to take care of myself." "You're stronger than you think. You've survived things that would break most people." "So have you. That's why you're so scared." Lena squeezed his hand. "Because you know how cruel the world is, and you don't want your child to have to be as hard as you are to survive it." Victor's fingers tightened around hers. "Yes." They sat like that as darkness fell and the stars came out, hands linked across the table, two people trying to find their way to something that looked like partnership in the ruins of a transaction that was never supposed to become real. That night, Lena lay in the comfortable bed and listened to the sound of the lake lapping against the shore. Through the walls, she could hear Victor moving around in his room, and for the first time, the presence didn't feel threatening. It felt almost comforting, knowing she wasn't alone in this beautiful, isolated place. She must have fallen asleep because she woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. Lena pulled on a robe and followed the scent to find Victor in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with the easy competence of someone who actually knew what he was doing. "Good morning," he said, not turning from the stove. "How do you feel?" "Surprisingly good, actually." Lena poured herself water from the pitcher on the counter. "No nausea this morning. The doctor said fresh air and rest would help." Victor plated the food and brought it to the table. "I thought we could walk down to the lake after breakfast, if you're feeling up to it." They ate in companionable silence, and Lena marveled at how different this felt from their sterile meals in the penthouse. Here, Victor seemed looser, younger somehow. Like being away from the city let him shed some of the armor he wore constantly. The walk to the lake was short, down a worn path through pine trees that whispered in the morning breeze. The water was crystal clear, and Lena could see fish darting beneath the surface. Victor led her to a dock that extended out over the water, and they sat side by side with their feet dangling above the gentle waves. "I used to come here every summer as a kid," Victor said. "My grandfather would bring me for the whole month of July. We'd fish and swim, and he'd tell me stories about building his empire, about the choices he made, the prices he paid." "It sounds like you loved him." "I did. He was hard and sometimes cruel, but he loved me in his way. wanted me to be better than him, stronger, but also to remember that strength without humanity is just monstrosity. Victor picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way. Lena watched the ripples spread across the lake's surface. You can remember again. It's not too late. Isn't it? I've done things, Lena. Terrible things. Built an empire on fear and violence and ruthless efficiency. I can't undo any of that. No. But you can choose differently going forward. Lena turned to look at him. For your child. For yourself. Victor's throat worked. I want to. God, I want to. But I don't know how to be anything except what I am. Then let me help you. The words came out before Lena could stop them. Let this be real. Not a contract or a transaction, but a real attempt at building something. Victor stared at her. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking for a chance, for both of us, to try to make this work, to be actual partners instead of strangers sharing space. Lena's heart was racing, but she pushed forward. I'm not saying I love you, I barely know you. But I know I don't want to raise our child in that cold penthouse, pretending we're strangers who just happen to be married. I want to try for something better. And if I can't give you better? If all I know how to do is control and possess? Then we'll figure it out together, set boundaries, learn to communicate, do whatever it takes. Lena put her hand on his. But we have to try, Victor, for our baby. Victor looked down at their joined hands, and Lena watched something shift in his expression. Not love, not yet, but possibility. Permission to hope for something he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. Okay, he said quietly. We'll try. It was the smallest word, the most tentative agreement, but sitting there on the dock with the morning sun warm on their faces and the future spreading out before them like the lake, vast and uncertain and full of hidden depths, it felt like the beginning of something that might actually matter. They spent the rest of the weekend talking. Really talking, not the careful surface conversations they'd had in the penthouse. Victor told her about his childhood, about losing his parents young and being raised by his grandfather's iron will, about the illness that had left him sterile, or so he'd thought, and how that diagnosis had shaped every decision he'd made afterward. I convinced myself I didn't want a family because I couldn't have one, he admitted on their last night there, sitting by the fireplace as rain drummed against the windows. Easier than wanting something impossible. So I built an empire instead. Filled my life with power and money and control because those were things I could have, things I could keep. And now, Lena asked from her spot on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Now I'm terrified because a child isn't something you can control. Fatherhood isn't a transaction or a contract. It's messy and unpredictable and requires exactly the kind of vulnerability I've spent 15 years avoiding. Victor stared into the fire. What if I'm no good at it? What if I damage our child the way my grandfather damaged me? Your grandfather also taught you honor and gave you this place, taught you to cook and fish and remember your humanity. That's not damage, Victor. That's love. Lena shifted to face him better. You're so focused on the bad you might do, you're not seeing the good you could do. I want to believe that. Then believe it, or at least try. Lena smiled. We're both going to mess up. We're both going to be terrified and confused and have no idea what we're doing, but we'll do it together. That has to count for something. Victor finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made Lena's breath catch. I watched you for months before I ever approached you about the contract. Did Marcus tell you that? No. I saw you at that diner every morning. You were exhausted, running on no sleep and too much caffeine, but you smiled at every customer. You were kind even when people were rude. You never complained, never gave up, just kept fighting. Victor's voice dropped. I told myself I chose you because you were strong and loyal, but the truth is I was drawn to you, to your resilience, your goodness, all the things I'd convinced myself I didn't need. Lena's heart was hammering. Victor, I'm not saying this to pressure you or make you feel obligated. I'm saying it because you deserve honesty. The contract was business, yes, but the choice was personal. And that night when He stopped, collected himself. It wasn't a mistake. Not for me. It was the first honest thing I'd done in years. Lena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the intensity of what Victor was offering. But another part, the part that was tired of being afraid, tired of settling for survival instead of actually living, wanted to stay. Wanted to see what they could build if they actually tried. "I need time," she said finally, "to process all of this, to figure out what I want beyond just survival." "Take all the time you need." Victor stood up. "But know that I mean what I said, about trying, about being partners. I won't be perfect at it. I'll probably be terrible at it, but I'll show up. I'll do the work, for you and for our child." He left her alone with the fire and her thoughts, and Lena sat in the warm darkness thinking about choices and chances and the strange alchemy that could transform a transaction into something real. They returned to the city on Sunday evening, and Lena felt the change immediately. The penthouse felt colder, more sterile, a cage dressed up as luxury. But Victor had promised to try, and she saw evidence of that immediately. He'd had her room redecorated while they were gone. The sterile white and gray had been replaced with warm colors, soft blues and greens that reminded her of the lake house. There were plants on the windowsill, real ones that would need care and attention. Books on the shelves that looked chosen for her specifically, not just expensive decoration. "I had Marcus research what pregnant women might need," Victor said, hovering in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to enter. "If anything's wrong, we can change it." "It's perfect," Lena said, running her hand over the soft throw blanket draped across the chair. "Thank you. I also hired a nutritionist and a prenatal yoga instructor. The doctor said exercise would help with your symptoms, and I want to make sure you have everything you need." Victor paused. "And I cleared my schedule for your next appointment. I'd like to be there, if that's okay." Lena turned to look at him. "You want to come to my doctor's appointment?" "It's our child. I should be there." Victor shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Unless you'd rather I wasn't." "No, I'd like you to be there." Lena smiled. "It's just surprising, a good surprising." "I'm trying," Victor said simply. "Like I promised." The appointment was the following week, and Lena could feel Victor's tension radiating off him as they sat in the waiting room. He'd worn a suit, of course he had, but he'd left the jacket in the car and rolled up his sleeves, and Lena thought he'd never looked more human than he did sitting in that pastel-colored waiting room, surrounded by visibly pregnant women and their excited partners. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Terrified," Victor admitted. "What if something's wrong? What if the tests were false positives and there's actually no baby? What if—" "Victor." Lena took his hand, threading their fingers together. "Breathe, one step at a time." He squeezed her hand like a lifeline. The doctor brought them back and did the usual exam. Blood pressure, weight, questions about symptoms. Then she pulled out the ultrasound machine, and Lena felt her own anxiety spike. "Let's see what we've got here," the doctor said cheerfully, applying gel to Lena's stomach. The wand pressed down, moved around, and then suddenly the room filled with sound. A heartbeat, fast and strong and impossibly real. Lena gasped, and beside her, Victor made a sound like he'd been punched. "There's your baby," the doctor said, pointing to a tiny shape on the screen. "See? Everything looks perfect. Good size for 8 weeks, strong heartbeat. Congratulations, you two." Victor was staring at the screen like it held the secrets of the universe. His hand in Lena's had gone rigid, trembling slightly. "That's—" his voice broke. "That's our child." "That's your child," the doctor confirmed, smiling. "Would you like to hear the heartbeat better?" She turned up the volume, and the rapid rhythm filled the room. Lena watched Victor's face as he listened, saw the exact moment his carefully constructed walls crumbled completely. Tears slipped down his cheeks, unchecked, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "I didn't think—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The doctor tactfully busied herself with printing ultrasound pictures, giving them a moment. Lena reached up and wiped the tears from Victor's face, and he caught her hand, pressed it to his cheek. "Thank you," he whispered. "For this. For everything." Lena felt her own tears starting. "We made this together. You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." Victor looked back at the screen where their tiny baby's heart was still beating its fierce, impossible rhythm. "You've given me something I thought I could never have. something I didn't even know I wanted until it was already growing inside you. That deserves more thanks than I know how to give." They left the doctor's office with ultrasound pictures and a due date, early November, and a shared sense of wonder that neither of them quite knew what to do with. In the car, Victor kept glancing at the ultrasound photo resting on the dashboard like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "I want to tell my mother," he said suddenly, "about the baby. She deserves to know she's going to be a grandmother." Lena's stomach clenched. They'd had that dinner with Victor's mother weeks ago, before the pregnancy, and it had been excruciating. The woman had been polite but cold, clearly skeptical of Lena's place in her son's life. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "She'll find out eventually. Better it comes from us." Victor reached over and took Lena's hand. "And I want her to know this is real, that we're trying to make this work. Maybe it'll help her accept you. Or maybe she'll think I trapped you. She might, at first, but she'll come around." Victor's mouth quirked. "She wants grandchildren almost as much as she wanted me to get married. This gives her both." The dinner with Victor's mother was scheduled for the following evening, and Lena spent the entire day anxious. She changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple dress that didn't yet show her barely there baby bump. Victor found her in front of the mirror, worrying at her hair. "You look beautiful," he said from the doorway. "I look terrified." "That too." Victor came up behind her, and for a moment Lena thought he might touch her, but he stopped just short, maintaining that careful distance he'd kept since the lake house. "She's going to love you, eventually. You're giving her the one thing she's wanted for years. A grandchild. A daughter." Victor's reflection met her eyes in the mirror. "She always wanted a daughter. She'll see this baby as a second chance." The restaurant was exclusive and expensive, the kind of place where the waiters spoke in hushed tones, and the silverware probably cost more than most people's cars. Victor's mother was already seated when they arrived, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully neutral. "Victor." "Lena." She offered her cheek for Victor to kiss and gave Lena a polite nod. "Shall we order?" They made it through appetizers on small talk, Victor's business, the weather, carefully neutral topics that skirted around anything real. Lena could feel Victor's tension building, could see him gathering courage for the announcement. Finally, over the main course, he reached over and took Lena's hand. "Mother, we have news. Lena is pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor's mother set down her fork with careful precision, her face unreadable. "Pregnant, I see. Due in November," Victor continued, his voice steady despite the tightness around his eyes. "We had the first ultrasound yesterday. Everything looks healthy." "How unexpected." His mother's gaze moved to Lena, sharp and assessing. "Given your medical history, Victor, I'm surprised this is even possible." "So was I, but apparently miracles happen." Victor's thumb stroked across Lena's knuckles. "We're both very happy about it." "Are you?" It wasn't a question. His mother turned her attention back to her plate. "Well, congratulations. I suppose we should discuss arrangements. Where you'll live, how this will affect the business, what kind of trust fund needs to be established." "Mother, I'm being practical, Victor. A child requires planning, security, especially a child with your last name." She looked at Lena again. "I assume you've signed appropriate legal documents? Prenuptial agreements, custody arrangements in case of divorce?" Lena felt Victor stiffen beside her. "There's not going to be a divorce." "You can't know that. You barely know this girl. Her name is Lena, she's my wife, and she's carrying my child." Victor's voice had gone cold, all the warmth from the weekend draining away. "I need you to respect that." His mother's expression softened slightly. "I'm trying to protect you. That's what mothers do." "Then be happy for me. For us. This baby is a miracle I thought I'd never have. Can't you just be happy?" For a long moment, Victor's mother said nothing. Then, slowly, something shifted in her face. "Show me the ultrasound picture." Victor pulled it from his jacket pocket, and his mother studied it with an expression Lena couldn't read. When she looked up, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "November, you said?" "Early November. The doctor will know more at the next appointment." "I'd like to be there." if that's acceptable to both of you. She turned to Lena. I know I haven't been welcoming, but this changes things. This child is my family. That makes you family too, whether I'm ready for it or not. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really an olive branch, but it was something, and Lena found herself nodding. You're welcome to come to the appointments. I think our baby should know their grandmother. The rest of the dinner passed more easily, conversation flowing into discussions of nursery colors and family names and whether Victor would actually survive being a father. By the time they left, his mother had promised to send over family heirlooms and baby clothes that had been in storage for decades. In the car on the way home, Victor was quiet. Lena watched the city lights stream past and finally asked, Are you okay? I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Victor admitted. For this to all fall apart, it feels too good to be real. Maybe it is real. Maybe sometimes good things actually happen. Victor pulled the car to a stop outside their building and turned to look at her. I'm going to work very hard to make sure this stays good. For you and the baby. I promise you that. I know you will. Lena smiled. We both will. They rode the elevator up to the penthouse in comfortable silence, and when they reached their floor, Victor walked Lena to her door, new habit he'd developed, making sure she was settled before retreating to his own space. Good night, Lena, he said softly. Good night, Victor. He started to leave, then turned back. The heartbeat. I can't stop thinking about it. That sound. Me neither. It's real now. All of this. It's actually real. Victor's hand moved toward her stomach, then dropped. Is it okay if I... Lena understood what he was asking. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. You can always touch. You're their father. Victor's hand was warm through the fabric of her dress, and Lena watched his face soften with wonder. Hello in there, he said quietly. This is your father. I'm still figuring out what that means, but I promise I'll try my best. You're the best thing I never knew I wanted. Lena felt tears prick her eyes at the tenderness in his voice. This was a side of Victor she'd never seen, gentle and uncertain and completely unguarded. It made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they really could make this work. Victor lifted his hand reluctantly. Thank you for letting me... He trailed off, then leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Sleep well. Both of you. Then he was gone, and Lena stood alone in her doorway, touching the spot where his hand had been and feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. Not love, not yet, but definitely, unmistakably, hope. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm, one that felt less like a transaction and more like two people learning to orbit each other without collision. Victor came home earlier now, often joining Lena for dinner that they ate together in the dining room, instead of retreating to separate corners of the penthouse. They talked about small things, her prenatal yoga classes, his business meetings, the books she was reading about pregnancy and parenthood. Sometimes the conversation flowed easily, and sometimes awkward silences stretched between them, but they both kept trying. Lena's body was changing in ways that fascinated and terrified her. The morning sickness was relentless, striking at random times despite the doctor's assurances that it would pass. She'd lost weight instead of gaining it, and the worry etched itself into Victor's face every time he watched her struggle to keep down a meal. You need to eat something, he said one morning, finding her pale and exhausted in the kitchen after another bout of nausea. I can't. Everything makes me sick. Victor disappeared into his study and returned 10 minutes later with a list. These are foods other pregnant women said helped. Crackers, ginger tea, peppermint. I'm sending Marcus to get all of it. You researched morning sickness? I researched everything. Victor pulled out his phone and showed her the dozen tabs he had open. Pregnancy forms, medical journals, parenting blogs. I need to know what's normal and what's not. I need to know how to help you. Lena felt something warm bloom in her chest. You're really taking this seriously. Of course I am. This is my child. He paused, seemed to struggle with the words. You're important to me. Both of you are. It was the closest he'd come to expressing real feeling, and Lena didn't push for more. They were building something fragile and new, and she understood it needed time to strengthen. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Lena was in the living room reading when Marcus appeared, his usual composure cracked by urgency. "Mrs. Romano, I need you to come with me. Now." "What's wrong?" "Mr. Romano's been in an accident. He's at the hospital." The world tilted sideways. Lena grabbed her purse with shaking hands and followed Marcus to the car, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What happened? Is he okay? Marcus, tell me." There was an incident at one of his properties, an explosion. He was inside. Marcus's jaw was tight as he navigated through traffic. "That's all I know." The drive to the hospital took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Lena's mind raced through terrible possibilities, imagining Victor hurt or dying or already gone, and the fear that clawed through her chest shocked her with its intensity. When had she started caring this much? When had Victor Romano become more than just the father of her child, more than the man who'd bought her freedom in exchange for her presence? The emergency room was chaos. Marcus led her through the maze of curtained areas to a private room where Victor sat on an examination table, his shirt torn and bloody, his face smudged with soot. A doctor was examining a gash on his arm while a nurse cleaned smaller cuts on his face. "Victor," Lena's voice came out strangled. He looked up, and relief flooded his features. "Lena, I'm fine. It looks worse than it is. You're covered in blood." "Most of it's not mine." Victor winced as the doctor probed the wound on his arm. "There were other people in the building. I got them out." "You went back into an exploding building?" Lena's fear crystallized into fury. "Are you insane? There were people trapped. I couldn't just leave them." "You could have died. You almost did die." Lena was trembling now, adrenaline and terror making her voice shake. "You have a child coming. You have responsibilities. You can't just—" "Mrs. Romano," the doctor interrupted gently. "Perhaps you should sit down. The stress isn't good for the baby." Lena realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face unchecked. Victor's expression shifted from defensive to concerned, and he reached for her with his uninjured arm. "Come here," he said softly. Lena went to him, and Victor pulled her close, wrapping his good arm around her while the doctor continued stitching the wound on the other. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in smoke and blood and the cologne that had become familiar. "I'm sorry," Victor murmured against her hair. "I didn't think. I just reacted." "You could have left me alone, left our baby without a father before they're even born." "I know, you're right. I'm sorry." Victor's hand rubbed slow circles on her back. "But everyone got out. That has to count for something." Lena pulled back enough to look at him. "What happened?" Marcus said there was an explosion. Victor's expression hardened. "It wasn't an accident. Someone planted a device in one of my warehouses, meant to send a message." "What kind of message?" "The kind that says I'm vulnerable, that my empire has cracks." Victor glanced at the doctor and nurse, both of whom were studiously pretending not to listen. "We'll talk about it later, at home." The doctor finished stitching and bandaging Victor's arm, proclaimed him lucky and stubborn in equal measure, and released him with instructions to rest and watch for signs of infection. Marcus brought the car around and they drove back to the penthouse in tense silence. Once inside, Victor headed straight for the bar and poured himself a drink. Lena watched him down it in one swallow and pour another. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "There's a family, the Morellis. They've been trying to move in on my territory for months. Small things at first, undercutting my prices, poaching my people. I thought I had it handled." Victor stared into his glass. "Apparently I was wrong. They tried to kill you. They tried to make a statement. If they'd wanted me dead, they would have picked a better target. This was about showing that I'm not untouchable." Victor set down the glass. "It means things are going to get dangerous, more dangerous than they already were." Lena felt ice settle in her stomach. "What does that mean for us? For the baby?" "It means I need to increase security. For you, for this building, for anywhere you might go." Victor ran a hand through his hair, dislodging soot and debris. "It means I need to respond, show strength, make it clear that attacking me has consequences." "You're talking about revenge." I'm talking about survival. In my world, if you don't respond to aggression, you're inviting more of it. Victor's eyes were hard again, the softness from the past weeks buried under layers of cold calculation. I won't let them threaten my family. I can't. Family. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them had explicitly acknowledged before. I'm scared, Lena admitted. I'm scared of what this means, of raising a child in this world where people plant bombs and see it as business. You think I'm not? Victor's control cracked, and Lena saw the fear underneath. Every decision I make now affects not just me, but you and our baby. The weight of that is crushing, but I can't walk away from this life. It's who I am, all I know how to be. Then teach our child to be something else, something better. How? When I'm planning retaliation against people who tried to kill me? When I'm exactly the kind of man I don't want my child to become? Victor laughed bitterly. I'm damning them before they're even born. Lena crossed to him and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Stop. You're not damned. You're scared and hurt and trying to protect us. Those are the actions of a father, Victor. A good one. You don't know what I'm capable of, what I've done. You're right. I don't. And maybe I don't want to know all of it, but I know you went into a burning building to save people. I know you're trying to be better for our baby. I know you held my hand during an ultrasound and cried when you heard our child's heartbeat. Lena's voice softened. That's the man I see. That's the father I want for my child. Victor closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you've got me anyway. Lena tried to smile. For better or worse. Isn't that what we promised? Those vows were supposed to be a formality. Maybe they were, but they're real now. We're real now. Lena pressed her hand to her stomach. All three of us. Victor's hand covered hers, and they stood like that in the expensive, sterile penthouse that was slowly becoming something that felt like home. The next morning, the penthouse was transformed into a fortress. Victor hadn't been exaggerating about increasing security. There were now cameras in every hallway, guards stationed at entrances Lena hadn't even known existed, and a security detail that followed her whenever she left the building. This is excessive, she protested as Marcus introduced her to the team that would be accompanying her to her prenatal yoga class. This is necessary, Victor corrected. He was in the study on a conference call, but he'd left the door open so he could monitor the briefing. The Morellis know about you now, about the baby. That makes you leverage. I'm not leverage, I'm a person. You're both. And until I've handled this situation, you don't go anywhere without protection. Victor's tone left no room for argument. Lena hated it. Hated the constant surveillance, the loss of what little freedom she'd clawed back in recent weeks. But she understood it too. Victor's world was dangerous, and she'd known that when she agreed to enter it. The baby just made the stakes impossibly higher. The yoga class was awkward with two large men in suits standing against the back wall, but Lena tried to focus on her breathing and the gentle stretches designed for pregnant bodies. The other women kept glancing at her security detail, whispering among themselves. She heard fragments of their conversations. That's Victor Romano's wife, and I heard there was an attempt on his life, and can you imagine living like that? No, Lena thought. You can't. Because until you're actually in it, you can't understand what it's like to be both protected and imprisoned, both cherished and controlled. After class, Marcus was waiting with the car. Mr. Romano would like you to come to the office. He has something to show you. Us, the office? I've never been to the office. First time for everything. Marcus held the door open. Victor's office was in a gleaming tower downtown, taking up the entire top floor. The decor was predictably sleek and modern, all glass and steel and power. His assistant, a severe woman in her 50s, looked up when they entered. Mrs. Romano, Mr. Romano is expecting you. Go right in. Victor's personal office was massive, with windows overlooking the entire city. He was standing at one of them when Lena entered, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian to whoever was on the other end. He held up a finger, 1 minute, and finished the conversation. Lena, thank you for coming. He gestured to a door she hadn't noticed. There's something I want you to see. He led her through the door into what appeared to be a second, smaller office, But this one was different. The walls were painted a soft sage green, and there was a comfortable couch and desk, bookshelves already stocked with volumes on business and marketing. "What is this?" Lena asked. "Your office, if you want it." Victor watched her reaction carefully. "You mentioned you had to drop out of college. Business degree. You were studying. I thought maybe you'd like to finish. I can arrange for online courses, flexible scheduling, and when the baby comes, you can work from here or from home, whatever you prefer." Lena stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a choice. A chance to be more than just my wife or the mother of my child. You're smart and capable, and you deserve your own life, your own career." Victor's voice was uncertain, like he wasn't sure if this was the right move. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to give you options." Lena walked to the desk and ran her hand over the smooth wood surface. "I don't know anything about your business." "Then learn. I'll teach you. Or Marcus will. Or any of a dozen people who work for me." Victor came to stand beside her. "You don't have to decide now, but the option is there. This space is yours if you want it." "Why?" Lena turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you gave up everything for your mother. Because you've been trapped in that penthouse with nothing to do except worry and wait. Because you deserve to have something that's yours." Victor paused. "And because I want our child to see their mother as someone with her own strength, her own power, not just as an extension of me." Lena felt tears prick her eyes for the second time in 24 hours. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it, that's all I'm asking." "I'll think about it," Lena promised. "Thank you, Victor. It's really thoughtful." "I'm trying to do better, be better." Victor's hand found hers. "For both of you." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Marcus stuck his head in, his expression grim. "Sir, we have a situation. The Morellis have made a move. You need to see this." Victor's entire demeanor shifted, the tender husband disappearing behind the mask of the ruthless crime boss. "Take Lena home. Double the security at the penthouse, and get me everything we have on their current operations." "Victor," Lena started. "Go home, Lena, please. I'll be there as soon as I can." He was already moving toward his main office, phone in hand, giving orders in that cold, commanding voice that reminded Lena of the man she'd married in that sterile government office. The drive home was tense. Marcus was on his phone the entire time, coordinating with Victor's security team, and Lena could feel the danger crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. "What's happening?" she asked. "The Morellis hit 3 of Mr. Romano's businesses simultaneously. Arson. They're sending a message." Marcus's jaw was tight. This is escalating faster than we anticipated. "What's Victor going to do?" "What he has to do. Respond with force. Show them that he can't be intimidated." Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I know this is difficult for you, but this is his world. This is how things work. By burning each other's buildings? By risking innocent lives?" "There are no innocent lives in this business, Mrs. Romano. Everyone knows what they're signing up for." "But I didn't," Lena thought. "I signed up to save my mother. I didn't sign up for war." The penthouse felt like a bunker when they arrived. There were guards everywhere, checking every entrance, monitoring every camera. Lena retreated to her room and tried to focus on anything except the knowledge that Victor was out there somewhere, planning retaliation that would probably involve more violence, more danger. She called her mother, needing to hear a familiar voice. The treatment was working. Her mother sounded stronger every time they spoke, hope replacing the exhaustion that had defined her for so long. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" her mother asked. "Tired. Scared. Overwhelmed." Lena curled up on her bed. "Is it supposed to be this hard? Pregnancy or marriage?" "Both." Her mother laughed softly. "Yes, actually, both are hard. Both require more of you than you think you have to give. But both can also be beautiful if you let them." "How did you and Dad do it? Before he left?" There was a long pause. "We didn't, honey. That's why he left. We were too young, too different, too unprepared for the reality of building a life together. But you're not me, and Victor's not your father. You have a chance to do this differently." "What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough for this life? You dropped out of school to save me." You married a man you barely knew. You're growing a human being inside you while living in a world you don't understand. You're plenty strong, Lena. You just don't see it yet." Her mother's voice was firm. "But you will. Motherhood has a way of showing you exactly how strong you can be." They talked for another hour, about nursery colors and baby names and all the normal things that felt surreal against the backdrop of Victor's dangerous world. When they hung up, Lena felt marginally better, like she'd been reminded of who she was beyond the role of Victor Romano's wife. Victor came home near midnight, smelling of smoke and something else Lena didn't want to identify. He looked exhausted, his eyes hollow, his movements slow and heavy. "Are you okay?" Lena asked from where she'd been waiting in the living room. "Define okay." Victor poured himself a drink and downed it. "I handled it. The Morellis won't be making any more moves for a while." "What does that mean?" "It means I did what I had to do to protect what's mine." Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. "Don't ask me for details. You don't want to know." But Lena could see it in his eyes, the weight of whatever he'd done, the cost of maintaining his empire. "Victor, I'm going to take a shower. We can talk in the morning." He moved past her toward his room, then stopped. "I'm sorry that you have to see this side of me, that our child will grow up knowing what I am. You're also the man who set up an office for me, who cried at our baby's heartbeat, who went into a burning building to save people." Lena stood up and crossed to him. "You're not just one thing, Victor. None of us are. Sometimes I wish I could be. It would be easier." Victor touched her face gently, and Lena could see blood on his knuckles. "Get some rest. You need to take care of yourself, both of you." He disappeared into his room, and Lena stood alone in the living room, feeling the weight of everything that was and everything that could never be. The next few days were tense. Victor was gone more than he was home, handling the fallout from whatever he'd done to the Morellis. When he was home, he was distant, buried under the weight of his responsibilities. The softness from the lake house felt like a dream Lena had imagined. Then, a week after the attacks, Lena woke up to cramping, sharp, pulling pains that made her gasp. She stumbled to the bathroom and saw blood. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She called for Victor with a voice that barely worked, and he appeared immediately, taking in her pale face and the fear in her eyes. "What's wrong?" "I'm bleeding. Victor, I'm bleeding, and I don't know if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the terrible possibility that their baby might be slipping away. Victor was on the phone immediately, calling the doctor, his voice sharp and commanding even as his hands shook. "We need you here now. My wife is bleeding. She's pregnant. I don't care what you have to cancel. Get here now." He hung up and pulled Lena into his arms. "It's going to be okay. The doctor is coming. It's going to be okay." "What if it's not? What if I'm losing the baby?" Lena was crying now, terror clawing at her throat. "What if all of this stress, all of this chaos—" Don't go there. Not yet." Victor held her tighter. "Come on, let's get you to bed. The doctor will be here soon." He carried her to her room and settled her on the bed, then sat beside her, holding her hand like if he gripped tight enough he could keep their baby safe through sheer force of will. The doctor arrived within 20 minutes. She examined Lena quickly, efficiently, her expression carefully neutral. "The cramping and spotting can be normal in early pregnancy," she said, pulling out a portable ultrasound machine. "Let's take a look and see what's happening." The moments while she applied the gel and positioned the wand were the longest of Lena's life. Victor's hand was crushing hers, and she could feel him holding his breath. Then, miraculously, the heartbeat filled the room, fast and strong and beautifully alive. "There's your baby," the doctor said, relief in her voice. "Heartbeat is good. Position looks fine. This appears to be normal first trimester spotting, probably stress-related." Lena sobbed with relief. Beside her, Victor made a sound like something breaking open inside him. "The baby's okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "The baby is fine, but your wife needs rest. No stress, bed rest for the next few days, and I want to see her again in 3 days to make sure everything's stable." The doctor looked at Victor pointedly. "Whatever is happening in your life right now, it needs to stop affecting her. This level of stress isn't good for mother or baby." Victor nodded, his jaw tight. "It stops. Today. I'll handle it." After the doctor left, Victor pulled Lena into his arms and just held her, his face buried in her hair. She could feel him shaking. "I almost lost you both," he whispered. "Because of my world, my choices, my enemies. I almost lost everything that matters." "But you didn't. We're okay. The baby's okay." "This time. What about next time?" Victor pulled back to look at her, and Lena saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. "I can't keep putting you in danger. I can't keep choosing my empire over my family." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying something has to change. I have to change." Victor stood up and paced to the window. "I've been thinking about this since the explosion, about what kind of father I want to be, what kind of life I want for our child. And it's not this. It can't be this. Victor, I'm going to step back from the more dangerous aspects of the business. Start transitioning to legitimate operations only. It'll take time, maybe a year or more, but I'm going to do it." Victor turned to face her. "For you, for our baby, for the future I want us to have." Lena stared at him. "You'd do that? Leave everything you've built?" "I'm not leaving it. I'm transforming it. There's a difference." Victor came back to the bed and took her hand. "I'll always be Victor Romano. I'll always have power and influence and enemies. But I can choose to exercise that power differently, to build something our child can be proud of instead of ashamed of. That's a huge decision. It's the only decision that makes sense. When I thought I might lose you both today, everything became very clear very quickly." Victor's thumb stroked over her knuckles. "You and this baby are more important than territory or reputation or anything else. I just needed fear to show me that." Lena pulled him down to sit beside her again. "You're sure? Once you start down this path, there's no going back. I'm sure. More sure than I've been about anything except marrying you." Victor's mouth quirked, even when that was supposed to be just business. "It was never just business, not really." "No," Victor agreed quietly. "Not from the moment I saw you in that diner, fighting to stay awake on your feet. Not from the moment you signed those papers with hands that shook but eyes that stayed fierce. You were always more than business, Lena. I was just too much of a coward to admit it." "And now?" Victor leaned in and kissed her forehead, soft and lingering. "Now I'm admitting it. You're my wife. Not because of a contract, but because I choose you. Every day, for however long you'll have me. Even when I'm terrified and bleeding and convinced everything's falling apart. Especially then." Victor settled beside her on the bed, pulling her carefully into his arms. "Rest now. Doctor's orders. I'll stay right here." Lena closed her eyes and let herself relax against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. The cramping had subsided and the fear was receding, leaving behind a fragile kind of peace. "Victor?" she murmured drowsily. "Hmm? I choose you too, just so you know." His arms tightened around her. "I know. I'm starting to believe I might actually deserve it." "You do. We both deserve a chance at this." "Then let's take it. Together." Lena drifted off to sleep in Victor's arms, their baby safe between them, and for the first time since signing that contract in a sterile government office, she let herself believe that maybe they really could build something worth keeping, something real and messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. The impossible was becoming possible, one heartbeat at a time. The morning after the scare, Lena woke to find Victor still beside her, awake and watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His hand rested protectively over hers on her stomach, and in the early light filtering through the curtains, he looked younger somehow, the hard edges of his face softened by something that looked like wonder. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "A while. I kept checking to make sure you were breathing." Victor's mouth twisted ruefully. "I know that sounds ridiculous. It sounds like you were scared, terrified. I faced down armed men, survived attempts on my life, built an empire through sheer ruthlessness. But the thought of losing you, losing our baby," he trailed off, his jaw working. "That's a fear I don't know how to control." Lena shifted to face him better, wincing slightly at the residual cramping. "The doctor said we're fine. The baby's fine." For now. But she was right about the stress. About my world bleeding into yours and putting you both at risk. Victor sat up, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. I made calls last night while you were sleeping. Started the process of stepping back from the operations that bring the most heat. Just like that? Just like that. Marcus is handling the transitions. It'll take months to fully extract myself, but the wheels are in motion. Victor looked at her seriously. I meant what I said. You and the baby come first. Everything else is negotiable. Your enemies won't make this easy. No, they won't. The Morellis especially will see this as weakness. They'll push harder, try to capitalize on the perceived vulnerability. Victor's expression hardened. Which is why we're leaving the city for a while, going somewhere they can't reach us. Lena's stomach clenched. Where? The lake house. It's secure, isolated. I can run the business remotely and you can rest without worrying about explosions or surveillance or any of this. Victor touched her face gently. I should have taken you there weeks ago. Should have prioritized your safety over my pride. When would we leave? Today. As soon as you're feeling strong enough to travel, Marcus is already arranging everything. Victor stood up, already shifting into the commanding mode that came so naturally to him. Pack what you need for an extended stay. I'll handle the rest. How extended are we talking? Until the baby comes. Maybe longer. Victor paused at the door. I know it sounds extreme, but I need to know you're safe while I dismantle parts of my empire. And I need to be somewhere I can focus on becoming the kind of man who deserves to be a father. Before Lena could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the morning light and the realization that her entire life was shifting again. But this time, the shift felt less like losing control and more like choosing a different path. A safer one. A better one. They left the penthouse that afternoon in a convoy of 3 cars, security flanking them on all sides. Lena watched the city recede through the rear window, feeling oddly disconnected from the life she'd been living there. The penthouse had never truly felt like home. It was too cold, too controlled, too much a monument to Victor's isolation. But the lake house, with its warm wood and stone, its memories and history, that felt like a place where something real could grow. The drive took 2 hours, and Lena dozed for most of it, exhausted from the morning's drama and the persistent fatigue that came with growing a human. When she woke, they were pulling into the long driveway, trees arching overhead to create a tunnel of green that opened onto the house she remembered, solid and welcoming against the backdrop of the lake. Home, Victor said softly. And Lena realized it was the first time she'd heard him use that word about any place. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt surreal in its domesticity. Victor worked from the study, conducting business over video calls and encrypted messages, but he was present in a way he'd never been in the city. They ate breakfast together on the porch overlooking the lake. They took walks through the woods, Victor pointing out landmarks from his childhood. They cooked dinner side by side, Lena reading recipes while Victor handled the actual preparation with surprising skill. My grandfather believed men should be self-sufficient, he explained one evening as he chopped vegetables with practiced precision. Said depending on others for basic needs was a weakness. So he taught me to cook, clean, repair things, made sure I could survive without servants. Smart man. Hard man. But yes, smart. Victor slid the vegetables into the pan, and the kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and olive oil. He'd probably approve of this. Of you. Of the choice to step back and build something sustainable instead of just powerful. Would he approve of how you got here, the contract marriage? Victor was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the cutting board. Honestly? Probably. He was pragmatic about relationships. My grandmother was chosen for him by his father, a business arrangement that happened to work out. He would have understood the logic of what I did. But, Lena prompted, hearing the unspoken word in his tone. But he also loved her, deeply. By the end, she was the only thing that mattered more than the empire. Victor turned to look at Lena. I think he would tell me not to waste the opportunity, not to let pride or fear keep me from something real. And what would you tell him? That I'm trying. That for the first time in my life, I want something more than power or control or revenge. Victor moved closer, and Lena could see her own reflection in his eyes. That I'm terrified of wanting it because losing it would destroy me. Lena reached up and cupped his face, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her palm. Then don't lose it. Choose it. Every day. The way I'm choosing to stay, to try, to build this with you. Victor leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. I don't know how to do this. How to be vulnerable. How to let someone matter this much. Neither do I, so we'll figure it out together. Lena smiled. That seems to be our pattern, stumbling through the impossible until it becomes possible. Victor kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. It was different from the desperate, half-remembered intimacy of their wedding night. This was intentional, chosen, real. When they pulled apart, both of them were trembling. I'm falling in love with you, Victor said, the words rough and unpracticed. I don't know when it started. Maybe the moment I saw you refusing to break under the weight of everything trying to crush you. Maybe when I heard our baby's heartbeat and realized you'd given me a miracle. But it's happening, and I needed you to know. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. I'm falling too. It's terrifying. Yes, it is. Victor pulled her close, careful of her still flat stomach. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the best things are supposed to be terrifying. They stood like that in the warm kitchen, dinner forgotten, just holding each other while the sun set over the lake and painted everything gold. It felt like a beginning, like crossing some invisible threshold from what they'd been forced to be into what they were choosing to become. The peace lasted 3 weeks. Lena was in the nursery, a spare bedroom they'd started converting with soft yellows and greens, furniture that Victor had ordered and assembled himself. When Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Mrs. Romano, I need to speak with you and Mr. Romano immediately. The tone sent ice through Lena's veins. What's wrong? Please. In the study. Victor was already there when Lena arrived, his face carved from stone as he stared at something on his laptop screen. He looked up when she entered, and she saw fury in his eyes, barely contained. What happened? Lena asked. The Morellis found out about the baby, about you being here. Marcus pulled up a series of photos on his tablet, surveillance shots of Lena at the lake house, walking through the woods, sitting on the porch. They've been watching, for weeks. Lena felt her knees go weak. Victor was at her side immediately, guiding her to a chair. How? She managed. Someone on the inside. One of the security detail we brought from the city. Marcus's jaw was tight. He's been dealt with, but the damage is done. They know where you are, and they're planning something. What kind of something? Victor's voice was lethal. An extraction. They want to take Mrs. Romano, use her and the baby as leverage to force you back into the territories you've been ceding. They think if they have your family, you'll have no choice but to fight. The room went very quiet. Lena watched Victor's hands curl into fists, watched the careful control he'd been cultivating slip beneath a wave of cold rage. When? He asked. We don't know exactly, but soon. Within days. Marcus looked at Lena. We need to move you. Somewhere they can't find. Somewhere. No! Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. No more running. No more hiding. This ends now. Victor, Lena started. They threatened my family, my pregnant wife, my unborn child. Victor stood up, and Lena saw the ruthless crime boss she'd married in that sterile office, the man who'd built an empire through fear and force. I've been patient. I've been strategic. I've tried to step back to be better. But they've made this choice for me. What are you going to do? Lena asked, though part of her didn't want to know. What I should have done weeks ago, end the Morellis permanently. Victor's eyes were ice. Marcus, assemble the team. I want everyone we have. And I want information, every property they own, every person they employ, every weakness they have. Sir, with respect, this is exactly the kind of escalation. I don't care. Victor's control fractured completely. They put a target on my wife, on my child. There is no coming back from that. No negotiation, no compromise. They wanted war. They're getting annihilation. Lena stood up, ignoring the way her legs shook. Victor, listen to yourself. This is what you said you were leaving behind. The violence, the retaliation. You promised you were going to be better. That was before they threatened you, before they made it impossible for me to keep you safe without destroying them. Victor turned to her, and the anguish in his eyes made her chest ache. Don't you understand? I can't lose you. I can't lose our baby. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let them take you from me. And what happens to the man I was falling in love with? The one who was trying to be the father our child deserves? Lena moved closer to him. If you do this, if you go down this path, you can't come back from it. You'll be exactly what you were before, maybe worse. Is that what you want? I want you alive. I want our baby safe. Everything else is secondary. Even your soul? Victor flinched like she'd struck him. If that's the price, yes. Lena felt tears slip down her cheeks. Then you're choosing the empire over us, just in a different way. How can you say that? Everything I'm doing is for you. No, everything you're doing is because of me. There's a difference. Lena wiped at her tears angrily. I don't want you to destroy yourself to protect me. I don't want our child to grow up with a father who's hollowed out from violence and revenge, who sacrificed everything good in himself because he thought that was love. Then what do you want me to do? Victor's voice broke. Tell me how to keep you safe without becoming a monster. Tell me how to be both the man you want and the man who can protect his family. Because I don't know, Lena. I don't know how to be both. The room was silent except for the sound of Victor's ragged breathing and Lena's quiet crying. Marcus had diplomatically stepped outside, leaving them alone with the impossible choice hanging between them. There has to be another way, Lena said finally. Something that doesn't require you to destroy yourself or them. Something that ends this without more blood. You're asking for a miracle. We've already had one. Our baby is a miracle. Maybe we get another. Lena took Victor's hands. Work with me. Let me help you think this through. You're brilliant at strategy. Use that instead of just rage. There has to be a solution that doesn't cost you your humanity. Victor looked at their joined hands, at the ring he'd given her that no longer felt like a chain. You have more faith in me than I deserve. I have exactly the amount of faith you've earned. By trying. By choosing us. By being terrified and doing it anyway. Lena squeezed his hands. Don't give up on that now. Not when we're so close to actually making this work. Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. I'm so scared, he admitted against her hair. Scared of losing you, scared of failing you, scared that I'm not strong enough to be what you need. You are? We both are. Together. Lena pulled back to look at him. But we have to actually be together. Not you protecting me while you sacrifice yourself. Real partnership. Equal stakes. You're pregnant. You can't. I can think. I can strategize. I can help you find a solution that doesn't require you to become the thing you're trying to leave behind. Lena touched his face. Let me in, Victor, all the way. Stop trying to shield me from your world and let me actually be part of solving this. Victor was quiet for a long moment, and Lena could see him fighting against every instinct that told him to handle this alone, to protect her by exclusion. Finally, he nodded. Okay, we do this together. You and me. He called for Marcus, who reappeared with the tablet. Show us everything, all of it. Lena needs to understand what we're dealing with. Marcus's eyebrows rose, but he complied, pulling up files and photos and intelligence reports. Lena sat beside Victor and absorbed it all. The scope of the Morelli operation, their connections, their vulnerabilities. And slowly, carefully, she started to see possibilities that violence would obscure. They want leverage, she said slowly. They want to force you back into fighting because that's the only way they can compete with you. If you're focused on war, you're not consolidating legitimate businesses. You're not cutting them out of markets they need. Yes, Victor confirmed. My transition threatens their entire operation. Without the chaos of gang war, they lose territory and income. So what if we give them something else? Something they want more than war? Lena pointed to one of the reports. They've been trying to break into overseas shipping. That's where the real money is, right? What if we help them get it? Marcus frowned. Why would we help our enemies? Because it gets them out of our territory, gives them a new focus, removes the incentive to fight, Lena looked at Victor. You've been divesting from the violent parts of your empire. What if some of those connections, those contacts, went to the Morellis instead? Not as weakness, but as strategy. Give them what they want, just not in the way they expected. Victor stared at her, something like awe crossing his face. You want to buy them off. Not with money, but with opportunity. I want to give them a reason to leave us alone that's more compelling than revenge or territory. Make peace more profitable than war. Lena pulled up another file. They're already stretched thin, 3 fronts, multiple operations. If they suddenly had access to international shipping routes, they'd need to focus everything on capitalizing on that. They wouldn't have resources to come after us. It's risky, Marcus said. They could take the connections and still attack. Then we make it conditional. Information released in stages, contingent on verifiable peace. We keep leverage while giving them what they need to move on. Victor was already thinking it through. Lena could see the gears turning. We'd need intermediaries, clean channels, documentation that protects us if they violate terms. Can you do that? Lena asked. I can do anything if it means keeping you safe without destroying myself in the process. Victor pulled her close and kissed her forehead. You're brilliant, you know that? I'm motivated. There's a difference. They spent the next 2 days working out the details. Victor made calls, pulled strings, leveraged connections he'd been planning to sever. Marcus coordinated with their legal team to create ironclad contracts. And Lena, despite her exhaustion and the persistent nausea that came with early pregnancy, stayed involved in every decision, every negotiation. The meeting with the Morellis happened on neutral ground, a restaurant owned by neither family, with enough witnesses to prevent outright violence. Victor insisted Lena stay at the lake house with extra security, and for once, she didn't argue. Some risks weren't worth taking. She paced the living room for hours while he was gone, Marcus's second-in-command stationed nearby in case something went wrong. Her hand kept drifting to her stomach, to the small bump that was finally becoming visible, and she prayed to forces she wasn't sure she believed in that this would work, that Victor would come home whole, that they'd actually found a way through the impossible. It was nearly midnight when she heard the car. Lena ran to the door, throwing it open to find Victor climbing out, exhausted but whole. She launched herself at him, and he caught her, holding tight. It worked, he said against her hair. They took the deal, signed everything. We have 6 months of guaranteed peace while they establish the new operations, and after that they're contractually obligated to stay out of our territory or lose everything we've given them. Lena pulled back to search his face. It's really over? It's really over. No more war, no more threats. Victor cupped her face in his hands. You saved me. From myself. From this life. You found a way when I could only see violence. We found a way. Together. Yes, together. Victor kissed her, deep and thorough, and Lena felt something settle in her chest. Relief. Hope. The beginning of something that felt like it might actually last. They went inside and Victor pulled her down onto the couch, keeping her close. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out an envelope, and Lena recognized it immediately, the original contract, the one that had bound her to him for 2 years in exchange for her mother's life. I'm tearing it up, Victor said. Right now. No more contracts between us. No more transactions. Just us, if you want that. Lena took the envelope and opened it, pulling out the pages she'd signed with trembling hands what felt like a lifetime ago. The terms looked absurd now, clinical and cold, nothing like the messy, complicated reality they'd built. I want that, she said. I want us, real and complicated and sometimes terrifying. I want to build a life with you, raise our baby together, figure out how to be partners without contracts or leverage or anything except choice. Victor took the contract and tore it in half, then quarters, then kept ripping until it was confetti scattered across the coffee table. No more cages, no more chains, just you and me and our baby, choosing each other every day. Every day, Lena agreed. Victor pulled her into his arms, and they sat like that while the fire burned down to embers, and the lake whispered against the shore beyond the windows. Lena felt their baby move for the first time, just a flutter, barely there, but unmistakable. She pressed Victor's hand to the spot, and his eyes went wide. Was that Our baby. Saying hello. Victor's face crumpled with emotion, and he leaned down to press his forehead against her stomach. Hello in there, he whispered. This is your father. I'm still figuring out what that means, but I promise I'll do better. Be better. For you and your mother. You're my second chance at everything. Lena ran her fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of the past months lifting. They'd started as strangers bound by desperation and contracts. They'd become something else through fear and hope and the impossible miracle growing between them. And now, finally, they were becoming what they'd both needed all along, partners, equals, two people choosing to build something real from the ruins of a transaction that should never have worked. I love you, Lena said, the words feeling right for the first time. Not forced, not fearful, just true. Victor looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. I love you too. More than I knew I could love anything. You terrify me and save me in the same breath. Good. We should terrify each other a little. Keeps things interesting. Victor laughed, and the sound was free and genuine. Nothing like the controlled amusement he'd offered in the early days of their arrangement. With you, interesting is guaranteed. They stayed up late into the night talking about the future they were building, about names for the baby and plans for the nursery and how they'd navigate parenthood together, about Victor's continued transition to legitimate business and Lena's desire to finish her degree and maybe, someday, work alongside him as an actual partner rather than just his wife. I want our child to see a mother with her own power, Lena said, her own accomplishments, not just someone who exists in your shadow. Then we'll make sure they do. Whatever you need, education, resources, opportunities, it's yours. Victor traced patterns on her shoulder. I want them to see what real partnership looks like, what it means to choose someone and keep choosing them, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Especially then, Victor agreed. As dawn broke over the lake, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they finally went to bed. Not to separate rooms in a sterile penthouse, but together in the master bedroom with windows overlooking the water, choosing closeness over distance, intimacy over isolation. Lena fell asleep in Victor's arms with their baby safe between them and the future spreading out before them like the lake, vast and deep and full of possibility. The impossible had become possible. The transaction had become love. And two people who'd started as strangers forced together by desperation had become a family choosing each other, deliberately and completely, one impossible day at a time. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of the past, and illuminating the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for, a real life, built not on contracts or control, but on trust and choice, and the fierce, terrifying beauty of actually letting someone matter. They'd survived the impossible. Now they'd learn to thrive in it. The months that followed, the peace agreement unfolded with a gentleness that still surprised Lena every morning when she woke. The lake house had transformed from a refuge into a home, filled with the small domestic rhythms that made life feel real. Victor worked from the study most mornings, transitioning his empire piece by piece into legitimate ventures, while Lena took online business courses and helped him analyze market opportunities with fresh eyes, unclouded by decades of operating in shadows. Her body changed with the passing weeks, her belly swelling into an undeniable curve that Victor couldn't resist touching whenever he passed her. He developed a habit of talking to the baby, telling stories about his grandfather, making promises about the life they'd build together, asking questions about whether they preferred classical music or jazz as he played different albums throughout the day. "You're ridiculous," Lena said one afternoon, finding him with his head pressed to her stomach, having what appeared to be a full conversation with their daughter. "She kicked when I said we'd take her fishing," Victor defended. "That's clearly approval." "She kicked because she has hiccups. The doctor explained this. Or because she's excited about fishing. My interpretation is equally valid." Victor grinned up at her, and Lena marveled at how much younger he looked these days, the permanent tension that had carved lines around his eyes finally easing. They'd found out the baby's sex 2 weeks earlier, a girl, perfect and healthy, according to the ultrasound. Victor had cried again, unashamed, and spent the rest of that day talking about teaching her to be strong and fierce and never letting anyone make her feel small. "What about teaching her to be kind?" Lena had asked. "You'll teach her that. I'll teach her to punch anyone who tries to take advantage of that kindness. Victor had been completely serious, and Lena had laughed until her sides hurt. Now at 7 months pregnant, Lena felt simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. Her body was doing something miraculous and exhausting, and Victor treated her like she might shatter if he breathed too hard in her direction. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him for the 100th time when he insisted on carrying groceries that she could easily manage. "You're carrying my daughter. That makes you the most precious thing in my world." Victor set the bags down and pulled her close as her belly would allow. "Let me take care of you. It's one of the few things I'm actually good at." "You're good at lots of things. You built an empire, negotiated peace with your enemies, and you make excellent pasta carbonara." "The pasta is my grandfather's recipe. I'm just following instructions." "Still counts." Lena kissed him softly. "And you're going to be a wonderful father. You know that, right?" Victor's expression turned serious. "I hope so. I'm terrified I'll mess it up, that I'll be too controlling or too distant, or you'll be human, you'll make mistakes. We both will." Lena touched his face. "But you'll also love her fiercely and protect her and show her what it means to choose to be better every single day. That's what matters." "When did you get so wise?" "When I had to figure out how to survive being married to you." Lena smiled to soften the words. "You're not an easy man, Victor Romano." "No, but I'm yours, completely, for however long you'll have me." "Forever sounds good. Think you can manage that?" Victor kissed her, deep and thorough, one hand cradling her face while the other rested on her belly. "Forever sounds perfect." The peace with the Morellis held. They'd taken the shipping connections and run with them, focusing all their energy on the new territory Victor had helped them access. Marcus reported regularly that they'd completely withdrawn from the areas they'd been fighting over, too busy capitalizing on legitimate opportunities to bother with gang warfare. "It's working," Victor said one evening, reviewing reports in the study while Lena sat nearby reading baby name books. "Better than I expected. They're actually thriving in the legal markets, making more money than they ever did through violence. Because violence is expensive and inefficient. You taught me that." Lena looked up from her book. "What do you think about Eleanor? For a name?" "Eleanor Romano." Victor tested it. "It's strong, classic. I like it." "Eleanor Grace Romano. Grace was my grandmother's name." Victor's expression softened. "Perfect. Eleanor Grace Romano, our daughter." Saying it out loud made it real in a new way. They were having a daughter, Eleanor, a tiny person who would call them mom and dad and depend on them for everything. The weight of it was staggering and beautiful all at once. "I want to do something," Victor said suddenly, "before she's born. Something permanent." "What kind of something?" "Marry you again, for real this time. Not a 7-minute transaction in a government office, but an actual wedding. With vows we write ourselves and people who matter to us as witnesses." Victor moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands. "I want to choose you in front of the world, Lena. Make promises I actually mean to keep. Start our family on a foundation of truth instead of contracts." Lena felt tears prick her eyes, hormones making her cry at everything these days. "You want a wedding? I want to stand in front of our families and promise to love you, honor you, be faithful to you for the rest of my life. I want Eleanor to grow up knowing her parents chose each other deliberately, completely, without coercion or desperation." Victor squeezed her hands. "Will you marry me? Again? For real this time?" "Yes," Lena whispered, then louder. "Yes. Absolutely, yes." Victor pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and held her while they both cried happy tears that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. The wedding was planned for early October before Lena got too uncomfortable to stand through a ceremony. They kept it small. Victor's mother, Lena's mother, who'd finally been declared cancer-free and was glowing with health and joy, Marcus, and a few other people from Victor's organization who'd become friends rather than just employees. They held it at the lake house, on the dock where they'd first started to believe that something real might be possible between them. Lena's mother had helped her find a dress that accommodated her belly, flowing ivory silk that made her feel beautiful instead of just pregnant. Victor wore a charcoal suit and looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The ceremony was simple. No officiant with tired eyes and a monotone voice this time. Marcus, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose, led them through vows they'd written themselves. Victor went first, his voice steady despite the emotion Lena could see in his eyes. Lena, 6 months ago I thought I knew what I wanted from life. Power, control, the kind of respect that comes from fear. Then you walked into my world and showed me what I actually needed. Partnership, vulnerability, the courage to be human instead of just powerful. You've given me a daughter I never thought I'd have and a future I didn't believe I deserved. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. To be honest, even when it's hard. To be present even when it's easier to hide. To love you not because a contract says I should, but because I genuinely cannot imagine my life without you in it. You saved me, Lena. Let me spend forever being worthy of that. Lena was crying before he finished, and her hands shook as she read her own vows. Victor, when I signed that contract, I thought I was trading my freedom for my mother's life. I thought I was entering a cage I'd have to endure for 2 years before I could escape. Instead, I found a partner who challenged me to be stronger than I knew I could be. You've given me autonomy, education, a voice in decisions that affect our lives. You've shown me that real strength isn't about control. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with the right person. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you, to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right, to raise our daughter to be fierce and kind and absolutely certain that she's loved beyond measure. You're not perfect, and neither am I. But together, we're building something that matters. That's what I choose. You, us. This impossible, beautiful life we're creating. Marcus pronounced them married for the second time, and when Victor kissed her, it felt nothing like that impersonal brush of lips at City Hall. This was passion and promise, and the kind of love that had grown in the spaces between fear and hope. The celebration afterward was warm and genuine. Victor's mother, who'd slowly warmed to Lena over the months, pulled her aside and pressed an antique locket into her hand. This was Victor's grandmother's. She'd want Eleanor to have it someday, and she'd want you to know that you've given my son something I thought he'd lost forever, the ability to be happy. Lena's mother was equally emotional. You did it, sweetheart. You built a life from impossible circumstances. I'm so proud of you. I got lucky. Victor turned out to be a better man than either of us expected. That's not luck. That's you seeing potential in him that he couldn't see in himself. That's you refusing to settle for the transaction when you deserved the real thing. Her mother hugged her carefully. You're going to be an amazing mother. I can't wait to meet my granddaughter. As the sun set over the lake, painting everything in shades of amber and rose, Victor pulled Lena onto the dock where they'd had their first real conversation about trying to make their marriage work. Happy? He asked, arms around her from behind, hands resting on her belly, where Eleanor was practicing what felt like gymnastics. Deliriously. You? More than I have words for. Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. Thank you for giving me this, for believing we could build something real. We did build something real, together. That's the only way it works. Lena leaned back against him, feeling Eleanor kick against his hands. She's active tonight. She's celebrating. Her parents just got married for real. Victor's voice was warm with amusement. You think she'll remember this? In some unconscious way. I think she'll grow up knowing she was wanted, planned for, celebrated before she was even born. That's what matters. They stood like that as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, and Lena felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey from that sterile government office to this moment had been terrifying and transformative and absolutely worth every stumbling step. November arrived with the turning leaves and the knowledge that Eleanor would be joining them any day. Lena's doctor had cleared her to stay at the lake house as long as they were within 30 minutes of the hospital, and Victor had practically paved a racing route to ensure they could make it in 20. You're being ridiculous again, Lena said, watching him time the drive for the 5th time. I'm being prepared. There's a difference. The hospital isn't going anywhere, and Eleanor isn't coming today. I'd know. Famous last words. Famous. Her water broke that night while they were watching a movie on the couch, Victor's hand resting on her belly as it had become his habit. Victor, Lena said calmly, even as panic fluttered in her chest. It's time. Victor went absolutely still. Then he exploded into motion, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago, calling the doctor, practically carrying Lena to the car, despite her protest that she could walk perfectly fine. "I've got you," he kept saying, his voice tight with fear and excitement. "I've got you. We're going to the hospital. Everything's going to be fine." "I know. Breathe, Victor. You need to breathe." "You breathe. I'll drive." The drive was a blur of contractions and Victor's hand gripping hers, his knuckles white. They made it to the hospital in 18 minutes, and Lena would have been impressed if she wasn't currently experiencing what felt like her entire body trying to turn inside out. Labor was long and exhausting and more painful than Lena had imagined, despite all the preparation. Victor stayed beside her the entire time, letting her crush his hand during contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when she told him to shut up. "You're doing amazing," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "I'm dying. There's a difference. You're bringing our daughter into the world. You're a warrior. Warriors get swords and armor. I get an epidural that stopped working an hour ago." Victor kissed her forehead. "You can do this. I know you can. You've survived everything life threw at you. You can survive this." Lena wanted to argue, but another contraction hit, and all she could do was grip his hand and push and pray this would be over soon. 14 hours after her water broke, Eleanor Grace Romano entered the world screaming her displeasure at the bright lights and cold air. The nurse placed her on Lena's chest, and the world narrowed to this tiny, perfect creature with Victor's dark hair and Lena's nose and lungs that proved she was absolutely her father's daughter. "She's here," Lena sobbed, holding their daughter against her skin. "Victor, she's really here." Victor was crying too, unashamed tears streaming down his face as he touched Eleanor's tiny hand with one finger. "She's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Hello, Eleanor. We've been waiting for you." Eleanor's cries quieted at the sound of his voice, her dark eyes trying to focus on this man who'd been talking to her through Lena's belly for months. Her fingers wrapped around Victor's, grip surprisingly strong, and Lena watched her husband fall completely, irrevocably in love. "I'm your dad," Victor whispered, "and I promise I'm going to do everything in my power to give you the best life possible. You're my miracle, Eleanor, my second chance at everything." The nurse took Eleanor to clean her up and check her over, and Victor kissed Lena with a tenderness that made her start crying all over again. "You were incredible," he said. "Thank you, for her, for everything. We made her together. All of this. Together." "Together," Victor agreed. "Always." The first weeks with Eleanor were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes and moments of pure wonder at this tiny person who'd completely upended their lives. Victor was hands-on in a way that surprised even Lena, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings, learning to swaddle and burp and soothe Eleanor's cries with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to building his empire. "You're a natural," Lena said one night, watching him rock Eleanor back to sleep with practiced ease. "I read 17 books on infant care. This is research, not natural talent." But Victor was smiling, that soft expression he only got when looking at his daughter. "Either way, you're good at it. She adores you." "The feeling is mutual." Victor settled Eleanor back in her bassinet, watching to make sure she stayed asleep before joining Lena in bed. "I never imagined I could feel this way. This protective. This terrified and grateful at the same time. Welcome to parenthood. It's a permanent state of controlled panic." "Is it always like this? The fear that something might happen to her?" Lena pulled him close. "Probably, but we'll figure it out. The same way we've figured out everything else." 2 months after Eleanor's birth, Victor made an announcement that shocked everyone, including Lena. He was stepping down completely from the criminal aspects of his empire, turning over the remaining territories to carefully selected successors who'd agreed to continue the transition to legitimate operations. He'd keep the legal businesses, real estate, investments, consulting, but the Romano name would no longer be associated with organized crime. "It's time," he told Marcus and the assembled leadership. "I have a daughter now. I want her to grow up proud of her father, not afraid of what he might be capable of. This is my choice. Final and permanent." There was resistance, of course. People who'd built their lives around Victor's empire weren't eager to see it transformed, but Victor had been preparing for this for months, setting up succession plans and buyouts and arrangements that would keep everyone comfortable even as the organization changed. "You're really doing it," Lena said that night, Eleanor asleep on her chest, while they sat in the nursery they'd finished at the lake house. "Leaving it all behind." "Not leaving, transforming. There's a difference." Victor stroked Eleanor's tiny head. "I want to build something she can inherit someday if she wants it. Hotels, investment firms, legitimate power, not an empire built on fear and violence. She might not want any of it. She might want to be an artist or a teacher or a veterinarian. Then I'll support that too. The point is giving her choices. The way I should have been given choices instead of being groomed from birth to be my grandfather's successor." Victor looked at Lena. "I want better for her. For all of us." "You've already given us better. Every day you choose us over the life you knew. You're giving us better." Victor kissed her softly. "Choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made. Even when I tried to pretend it was just business, even when I fought against it, choosing you was inevitable." Smooth talker, honest talker. There's a difference. Eleanor stirred, making the small noises that meant she'd be awake and hungry soon. Lena shifted to get ready to feed her, and Victor helped arrange the pillows the way she liked. "I've been thinking," Lena said as Eleanor latched on, "about going back to school, actually attending classes instead of just online courses. Maybe when Eleanor's a bit older." "I think that's a great idea. What would you study?" "Business, still, maybe with a focus on corporate ethics and transformation. I want to help other companies transition the way you're transforming yours. Show them it's possible to change, to be profitable and legitimate at the same time." Victor's smile was proud. "You'd be incredible at that. You already proved the concept works." "We proved it, together." Lena looked down at Eleanor, at this tiny person who changed everything. She's going to grow up seeing what real partnership looks like, what it means to support each other's dreams while building something together. That's the plan. Messy and imperfect, and absolutely real. 6 months later, on a spring morning with the lake sparkling beyond the windows, Lena and Victor prepared for something they'd been planning for weeks. They were returning to the city, not to the sterile penthouse, but to a new home they'd bought together. A brownstone with a garden and space for Eleanor to grow and enough room for the life they were building. The penthouse had sold to another wealthy executive who probably saw it the same way Victor once had, a statement of power and isolation. But Lena and Victor had moved past needing statements. They needed a home, and they'd found one. "Ready?" Victor asked. Eleanor strapped to his chest in a carrier, her dark eyes taking in everything with the serious focus she'd inherited from her father. "Ready," Lena confirmed, taking one last look at the lake house that had sheltered them through the transformation of their lives. "We can come back any time, right?" "Any time. This place will always be here, our refuge when the world gets too loud." Victor took her hand. "But it's time to go back, start the next chapter." The brownstone was everything the penthouse hadn't been, warm and lived in, with wooden floors that would show wear and windows that let in natural light. There was a nursery for Eleanor painted in soft yellows, and a study where both Lena and Victor could work side by side. There was a kitchen big enough to cook in together, and a garden where they could teach Eleanor about growing things. "It's perfect," Lena said, walking through the rooms while Victor carried Eleanor, pointing out features to her in the same tone he'd once used to discuss business strategies. "And see, Eleanor, this is where your mom will study while changing the corporate world. And this is the garden where we'll plant tomatoes because your mom insists homegrown tastes better. And this is where we'll have family dinners and birthdays and all the normal things I never thought I'd have." Lena came up behind him and wrapped her arms around them both. "You have them now. All of it. We built this together." That night, after Eleanor was asleep in her new nursery, Lena and Victor sat in their new living room, unpacked boxes surrounding them, and reflected on how far they'd come. "A year ago, I was forcing you into a contract marriage," Victor said, "watching you sign away your freedom in exchange for your mother's life. If someone had told me then that I'd be sitting here now, in a home we chose together, with a daughter sleeping upstairs, and an actual real marriage built on love instead of leverage." He trailed off. I wouldn't have believed it possible. I wouldn't have either. I thought I was entering a prison. Instead, I found a partner. Lena took his hand. We've come a long way from that sterile government office. We have. And we have a long way still to go. Eleanor's going to grow up, start asking questions about how we met, how our relationship started. Victor looked troubled. How do we explain that to her? We tell her the truth, that we started in an unconventional way, that we made mistakes and learned from them, that we chose to turn something transactional into something real. Lena squeezed his hand. We tell her that love isn't always neat or simple, but it's always worth fighting for. She's going to think her parents are crazy. Probably, but she'll also know she's loved beyond measure, that we wanted her, chose to bring her into this world, worked hard to build a life worthy of her. Lena smiled. That's what matters, not the messy beginning, but what we made of it. Victor pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city beyond their windows and the quiet breathing of their daughter through the baby monitor. I destroyed the original contract, Victor said suddenly, months ago at the lake house. But there was another copy in my safe at the office. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. I've been carrying it around for weeks, trying to decide what to do with it. Lena recognized it immediately. The thick legal paper, the formal language that had bound her to him. What did you decide? That I don't need it. That keeping it feels like holding on to a past we've moved beyond. Victor handed it to her. I think you should be the one to destroy it. You're the one who signed under duress. You should be the one to choose to let it go. Lena took the envelope and opened it, reading through terms that seemed incomprehensible now. The woman who'd signed this had been desperate and terrified, trading her freedom for her mother's survival. She barely recognized that version of herself. You know what I see when I read this? Lena asked. What? A woman who did whatever it took to save someone she loved, who was strong enough to sacrifice everything for family, who survived impossible circumstances and came out the other side not just intact, but thriving. Lena looked at Victor. I'm not ashamed of signing this anymore. It led me here, to you, to Eleanor, to a life I never could have imagined. So you don't want to destroy it? I want to keep it, not as a reminder of being trapped, but as a reminder of how far we've come, of what we've built from the worst possible beginning. Lena folded the papers back into the envelope. Someday, when Eleanor's old enough, we can show her this. Tell her the whole story. Let her know that even the hardest beginnings can lead to beautiful endings. Victor's eyes were bright with emotion. You continue to amaze me, every single day. Good. I'd hate to be predictable. Lena kissed him softly. We're going to be okay, Victor. All three of us. We're going to build a life full of love and chaos and normal problems instead of life or death crises. We're going to watch Eleanor grow up knowing she's cherished. We're going to keep choosing each other every day until we're old and gray and our daughter is bringing her own children to visit. That sounds perfect. Absolutely perfect. They put Eleanor's contract in a box with her birth certificate and hospital bracelet and other mementos of their journey from transaction to family. Then they finished unpacking their new home, building the life they'd fought so hard to create. In the years that followed, Victor completed his transformation into a legitimate businessman, building a reputation for corporate consulting that helped other companies transition from questionable practices to ethical operations. Lena finished her degree, then her master's, eventually partnering with Victor to create a consulting firm that specialized in business transformation. They became known as the couple who'd revolutionized an industry, though no one outside their inner circle knew the full story of how they'd started. Eleanor grew into a fierce, intelligent child who had her father's determination and her mother's empathy. She knew her parents' story in age-appropriate versions that evolved as she got older, and she never doubted for a moment that she was wanted and loved. On their 5th wedding anniversary, the real one, not the transactional City Hall ceremony, Lena and Victor returned to the lake house with Eleanor. She was 4 years old now, fascinated by everything, asking endless questions about the world. This is where your mother and I fell in love, Victor told her, showing her the dock where they'd had so many pivotal conversations, where we figured out how to be a family. Did you always know you'd love Mommy? Eleanor asked with the straightforward curiosity of childhood. Victor glanced at Lena, who smiled and nodded for him to answer honestly. No, sweetheart. At first, I didn't know anything except that I needed your mom in my life. But then I got to know her, how brave she was, how smart, how she made me want to be better than I was. And I fell in love with all of those things. Love isn't always instant. Sometimes it's a choice you make every day until one day you realize you can't imagine life any other way. That's what you and Mommy did? Chose each other every day? Every single day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Eleanor processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything. I'm glad you chose each other. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Best decision we ever made, Lena said, pulling her daughter into a hug. Choosing each other led to you, and you're the best thing that ever happened to us. That night, after Eleanor was asleep, Lena and Victor sat on the dock watching stars reflect in the water. No regrets? Victor asked. About what? Everything. The contract, the chaos, the completely unconventional way we built this life. Lena thought about it seriously. Not a single one. I got my mother back, healthy and whole. I got an education and a career. I got a partner who challenges me and supports me in equal measure. And I got Eleanor, who's the most incredible person I've ever known. She looked at Victor. How could I regret any of that? Even the parts where I was controlling and cold and everything you shouldn't want in a husband? Even those parts, because they were part of your journey to becoming the man you are now, the man who builds pillow forts with our daughter and helps me study for exams and hasn't raised his voice in anger in years. Lena took his hand. We all have pasts, Victor. What matters is what we do with our futures. And what are we doing with ours? Living, loving, building something that lasts. Lena leaned her head on his shoulder, being grateful for impossible miracles and choosing each other every day for the rest of our lives. Every day, Victor agreed. For the rest of our lives. They sat together until the moon rose high overhead, two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation and had become partners, lovers, parents, friends. The contract that had brought them together was filed away in a box of memories. No longer a chain, but a testament to how far they'd come. The penthouse where they'd maintained careful distance was sold and gone, replaced by a home filled with warmth and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Eleanor would grow up knowing her parents' story, learning that love could grow even in the hardest soil, that people could change if they chose to do the work, that family wasn't always about perfect beginnings, but about choosing to show up, day after day, building something real from whatever materials life provided. And years from now, when Eleanor was grown with children of her own, she'd tell them about her grandparents, who'd started with a contract and built an empire of love. She'd show them the yellowed papers in the old box and explain that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to choose transformation over resignation. But tonight, in the peaceful darkness beside the lake, with their daughter sleeping safe inside and their future stretching out before them full of possibility, Lena and Victor simply held hands and breathed in the quiet joy of having everything they'd never known they needed. The impossible had become their everyday. The transaction had become their truth. And two people who should never have worked had built a love story that would last generations, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. If only you're willing to choose them deliberately and completely, one impossible day at a time.